Back in the 1980s, my dad and his best friend embarked on an ambitious adventure to travel the world, a journey that would take them to far-flung corners of the globe. They explored vibrant cities and exotic landscapes, soaking in the cultures of Japan, South Korea, Thailand, Taiwan, Australia, and New Zealand. Each destination left its mark, but it was in Australia where an encounter unfolded that would linger in my dad's memory for decades, a chilling brush with danger that could have altered the course of his life and mine. At the time, my dad and his friend were quintessential backpackers, their heavy packs slung over their shoulders, each adorned with a proud Canadian flag patch stitched prominently on the side. These patches were more than just decoration. They were a badge of identity, signaling to the world that they were travelers from the Great White North, eager to explore but unmistakably foreign. In Australia, their tourist status was as clear as day, from their worn hiking boots to the maps they occasionally unfolded on street corners. They were young, adventurous, and perhaps a touch naive, open to the experiences the world had to offer, but not yet seasoned enough to spot every danger lurking in the shadows. It was on a sun-drenched afternoon in an Australian town. My dad never specified which one, though I imagine it was somewhere along the vast, rugged stretches of the outback or near a coastal hub that they caught the attention of a stranger. The man approached them with a casual stride, his presence commanding yet unsettling. He was tall, roughly the same height as my dad, who stood just over 6 feet, with jet black hair and a thick mustache that framed his face. There was something about his demeanor, perhaps the way his eyes lingered a bit too long, or the overly familiar tone in his voice, that set my dad's nerves on edge. From the moment the man spoke, my dad felt a visceral unease, a gut instinct screaming that something was off. He described it as a bad vibe, an almost primal warning that this stranger was not to be trusted. Despite this, the man struck a conversation, his words friendly on the surface, but laced with an undercurrent my dad couldn't quite place. He asked where they were from, commenting on their Canadian patches with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. My dad, ever polite, answered cautiously, keeping his responses short but civil. His friend, however, was less guarded, known for his lack of self-preservation. He chatted more freely, sharing details about their travels with the enthusiasm of someone who hadn't yet learned to be wary. My dad stood by, his discomfort growing, but he didn't want to seem rude or paranoid by cutting the conversation short. After all, they were travelers, and meeting locals was part of the experience, or so they told themselves. The man's question soon turned more pointed. "You boys got a place to stay tonight?" he asked, his tone casual but probing. My dad and his friend admitted they hadn't secured lodging yet, a common situation for backpackers who often relied on hostels or last-minute arrangements. The man's face lit up, though my dad later recalled that the expression felt more predatory than welcoming. "You know," the man said, leaning in slightly, "I've got a buddy who lives just a short bit away. There's a whole community out there that loves tourists. They'd be thrilled to have you. I can give you a ride. No problem at all." The offer hung in the air, and my dad's instinct screamed louder than ever. Red flags waved furiously in his mind. The man's insistence, the vague mention of a community, the offer a ride to an unknown location. Everything about it felt wrong, like a trap dressed up as hospitality. He glanced at his friend, hoping he'd pick up on the same unease, but his friend seemed oblivious, still smiling and considering the offer. My dad, however, was resolute. "No, thanks," he said firmly, his voice steady despite the knot in his stomach. "We're good. We'll find somewhere to stay." The man's demeanor shifted. His smile faltered, replaced by a flash of irritation that bordered on anger. He pressed harder, his voice taking on a more insistent edge. "Come on, it's no trouble. You don't want to be stuck out here with nowhere to go. My friend's place is perfect for travelers like you." He stepped closer, his tall frame looming, as if trying to intimidate them into agreeing. My dad's heart raced, but he held his ground, repeating, "No, really, we're fine." His friend, finally sensing the tension, backed him up, though his tone was less certain. "Yeah, we'll figure it out. he added, his earlier enthusiasm dampened. The man's persistence was unnerving. He kept pushing, his words growing sharper, his eyes narrowing as if he wasn't used to being refused. My dad could feel the situation escalating, the air thick with unspoken threat. He wondered what the man might do if they kept resisting. Would he walk away, or was he capable of something worse? Finally, after what felt like an eternity of back and forth, the man relented, with a curt nod and a glare that spoke volumes. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd or down a side street. My dad couldn't recall which, only that he was relieved to see him go. Shaken but determined to move on, my dad and his friend quickly found a hostel to spend the night, their earlier carefree attitude replaced by a newfound caution. They didn't speak much about the encounter that evening, but my dad couldn't shake the feeling that they'd narrowly escaped something sinister. The man's face, his mustache, and that unsettling vibe stayed with him, a memory that would resurface years later in a way he never expected. Fast forward to my childhood, when I was old enough to be curious about my dad's stories. He shared this tale with me one evening, his voice tinged with both relief and unease as he recounted the encounter. I was fascinated but also horrified, my young mind racing with what-ifs. Driven by curiosity, I turned to the internet, diving into Wikipedia pages about Australia's darker history. That's when I stumbled across an article about Ivan Milat, the infamous serial killer responsible for the backpacker murders. His crimes, which claimed the lives of at least 7 to 12 victims, began in 1989, the same year my dad and his friend were in Australia. The article included a photo of Milat, a tall man with black hair and a distinctive mustache. My heart pounded as I showed the image to my dad. His face paled and he nodded slowly. "That's him," he said, his voice quiet but certain. "That's the guy." The realization hit us both like a freight train. The man who had approached my dad and his friend, offering a ride to supposed community, matched the description of Ivan Milat, a predator who lured backpackers to their deaths in the Belanglo State Forest. His first known murders occurred in 1989, meaning my dad and his friend could have been among his earliest targets. Or worse, his first victims. The thought was chilling. If my dad hadn't trusted his gut, if he and his friend had climbed into that man's car, he might never have returned home. He wouldn't have met my mom, adopted me and my little sister, or built the life we have today. The weight of that near miss settled over us, a sobering reminder of how fragile fate can be. I'm forever grateful that my dad listened to his instincts that day. That single decision, born of a bad vibe and a stubborn refusal to ignore it, saved him from a fate I can't bear to imagine. It's a story that haunts me, not just for its terror, but for its reminder of how close I came in never existing. My dad's quick thinking and courage in the face of danger ensured that our family story could continue. And for that, I'll always be thankful. I'm currently staying at my future brother-in-law's house, a secluded place 10 miles from town and a mile from the nearest neighbor. It's a quiet, rural spot, surrounded by dense woods that seem to swallow sound and light. My sister spends weekends here, and while the isolation can feel peaceful, recent events have left me rattled, questioning what might be lurking just beyond the tree line. It all started a few days ago, and the unease has only grown since. It was late afternoon when my brother-in-law and I returned from work, both of us tired and ready to unwind. I sank into the couch, letting the day's exhaustion melt away, when a voice pierced the silence. "Hello," it called, clear and repetitive, coming from the front door. It sounded human, almost insistent, like someone was standing right outside, waiting to be let in. I stood, ready to answer, my hand reaching for the doorknob, but my brother-in-law's sharp voice stopped me. "Don't," he said, his tone firm, almost urgent. "Look out the window first." I moved to the window, pulling back the curtain, and peered outside. My stomach twisted. There was no one there, no figure, no shadow, not even a stray animal. The porch was empty, the yard still under the fading daylight. The voice had been so clear, so close, yet there was nothing to explain it. My brother-in-law's face was unreadable, but he waved it off. "Ignore it," he said, his voice calmer now. "Never open the door unless you can see someone standing there." His words were matter-of-fact, but they carried a weight that made me uneasy. I nodded, returning to the couch, but the incident gnawed at me. What had I heard? And why was he so quick to dismiss it? That wasn't the only strange thing. At night, I started hearing sounds that sent chills down my spine. Outside the laundry room, just beyond the thin walls of the house, I'd swear I heard a girl crying. It wasn't the soft whimper of an animal, but a human sound, raw and mournful, like a teenager lost in despair. The first time I heard it, I froze, straining to make sense of it. I mentioned it to my brother-in-law, hoping for an explanation, but he brushed it off. "It's just a deer," he said, his tone dismissive. "They make weird noises sometimes." But I've heard deer before, their high-pitched screams or grunts. And this was different. It was too human, too deliberate. I pressed him, but he just repeated, "Don't worry about it. It's nothing." My sister, who's been spending more time here, heard it too. She described it as a teenage girl's voice, repeating something that sounded like, "Why? Why?" in a haunting cadence. When I brought it up with her, she was quick to defend her fiancé. "He'd never put us in danger," she insisted, her eyes earnest. "He knows this place better than anyone." But her reassurance didn't ease the knot in my chest. My brother-in-law's warnings only deepened my unease. "Don't go outside if you hear anything," he told me one evening, his voice low and serious. "And never try to talk to it." The way he said it sent a shiver through me, as if he knew more than he was letting on. Desperate for answers, I dug into the history of the house and the surrounding area. I checked local records, scoured online forums, even asked around town, but nothing stood out. No tragedies, no ghost stories, no dark past tied to property. The house was ordinary, at least on paper. I ruled out other explanations too. I don't smoke, drink, or do drugs, and the carbon monoxide detectors are all in working order, their green lights blinking steadily. This wasn't a hallucination or a gas leak. Whatever was happening was real, and it was happening here. My curiosity got the better of me, and I pressed my brother-in-law again, this time asking if it could be something supernatural, like a Wendigo or a skinwalker. His response was immediate and sharp. "Skinwalkers are Navajo," he said, his voice clipped. "Wendigos are Cree or Algonquin, not Sioux. And don't talk about this stuff at night." His tone wasn't just dismissive. It was almost scolding, as if I'd crossed a line. But then his expression softened and he added, "If you're that curious, I'll show you. Tonight, around 9. Be ready." That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the woods grew dark, we prepared to venture out. My brother-in-law's neighbor, Peter, joined us. Peter lived a mile away, and apparently, whatever was happening at our place was affecting his home too. He was a middle-aged man, wiry and weathered, with a nervous energy that made his hands fidget. He confided that the strange noises, knocks, voices, cries, had been plaguing his property as well, especially when the power went out. He was so spooked that he refused to leave his wife and kids alone at night, fearing something might happen. His presence made the situation feel more real, more urgent. If this was affecting others, it wasn't just in my head. We trekked deep into the woods, the air cold and heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth. The beam of my brother-in-law's flashlight cut through the darkness, casting long shadows that danced across the trees. My heart pounded, a mix of fear and anticipation. I didn't know what we were looking for, but the weight of the unknown pressed down on me. After what felt like an eternity, my brother-in-law stopped abruptly in a small clearing. He raised his hand, signaling us to be quiet, and let out a soft dove call, its gentle coo echoing faintly. Doves don't call in January, not in these woods, so the sound felt out of place, almost ritualistic. Seconds later, an identical dove call answered from somewhere in the darkness. My breath caught in my throat. The sound was too perfect, too deliberate to be a coincidence. Before I could process it, a new sound broke the silence. A sharp knock, like with striking wood. It came from a tree to our left, then another to our right, then behind us, moving from tree to tree in a chaotic, unpredictable pattern. I strained my eyes, searching for movement, but the woods were impenetrable, the flashlight's beam revealing nothing but bark and shadows. The knocking grew louder, more insistent, as if something was circling us, taunting us. Then, a wave of dread hit me, so overwhelming it felt like a physical force. It wasn't just fear, it was a primal, gut-wrenching certainty that we were in danger. I locked eyes with Peter, and his wide, panicked gaze mirrored my own. Without a word, we turned and bolted, our boots crunching through the underbrush as we raced back to the house. My lungs burned, my pulse thundered in my ears, but I didn't dare look back. Peter, despite being nearly 50, kept pace, his fear driving him forward. We burst through the door, slamming it shut behind us, our breaths ragged. Peter was a wreck, pacing the living room, his voice trembling as he muttered, "I'm flipping his sh*T, man." He didn't stay long. Grabbing his keys, he hurried home to check on his family, leaving me alone with my questions. My brother-in-law, however, was nowhere to be seen. I realized with a jolt that he hadn't returned with us. Peter and I had made it back in minutes, but 2 minutes later, he finally walked through the door, his face calm, almost too calm. I stared at him, my mind racing. There was no way I'd outrun him. He was younger, fitter, a guy who could easily outpace me. And Peter, at his age, shouldn't have beaten him either. What had he been doing out there, alone in the woods? For those 2 minutes, I confronted him, my voice shaking. "What happened? Where were you?" He shrugged, brushing it off. "I shouted at it," he said, his tone casual, as if he just scolded a stray dog. But I hadn't heard a shout, and neither had Peter. No gunshot, no yell, nothing. His explanation didn't add up, and the way he avoided my eyes only deepened my suspicion. I pressed for more, and he finally opened up, though his answers were vague. He said the noises started last winter, always around the house or near the stables where he worked. They stopped in spring and summer, only to return this fall. He admitted he'd never seen whatever it was, only heard it knocks, cries, voices. Strangely, he added that similar things had happened to him as a child, up until he was 15, then stopped. Why they'd started again, he didn't know. His story only raised more questions. What was he hiding? Why had he stayed behind in the woods? And what was this thing that seemed to haunt not just his house, but Peter's too? The experience left me shaken, my sense of safety in this isolated house shattered. I can't shake the feeling that something is out there, watching, waiting. And worse, I'm not sure I can trust my brother-in-law's assurances that it's harmless. Those 2 minutes he spent alone in the woods linger in my mind, a mystery that feels as unsettling as the cries in the night. My name is Matthew, and I was just 10 years old when this happened, living in a small city in Illinois. The memories are vivid, etched into my mind like a scar, though some details have blurred with time. My family and I had settled into a large house in a quiet neighborhood, a place that felt safe and serene. Our home stood at the corner of a street, one of only 2 houses on that stretch, with a sprawling backyard that seemed to stretch endlessly toward a dense forest about 150 feet away. The woods were a constant presence, their shadows looming at dusk, but they never felt threatening until that winter. We were a big family. Me, my 3 brothers, my sister, and our parents. The house was always alive with noise, laughter, arguments, the clatter of dishes. About a year after we moved in, heavy snow blanketed the neighborhood, turning our backyard into a playground of powdery drifts. My brothers, engrossed in their video games, stayed glued to their room, but my sister and I couldn't resist the call of the snow. It was late afternoon, the sky a dull gray, and Mom gave us strict instructions. Play outside for no more than an hour, as darkness was creeping in. We bundled up in our coats and scarves, bursting out into the cold with the reckless joy of kids. The snow was perfect for a fight, soft and packable. My sister and I hurled snowballs at each other, laughing as we dodged and chased through the yard. I was relentless, pelting her with a well-aimed shot as she squealed and ran. The world felt alive, the air sharp with winter's bite. But then, as I paused to catch my breath, something caught my eye in the distance, near the edge of the forest. It was a figure, a tall, dark, shadowy shape standing motionless among the trees. My heart skipped, but I shook it off, convincing myself it was just a trick of the light or a tree cast in shadow. It was a mistake to ignore it, one that would haunt me later. But in that moment, I was too caught up in the game to dwell on it. I didn't tell my sister or my parents, and we kept playing until the cold drove us back inside. A month passed and January arrived, bringing with it a biting chill and light snowfalls. My sister and I were up early one morning, getting ready for school. It was still dark outside, the world hushed under a fresh dusting of snow. We bundled up in our heavy jackets, sturdy boots, and warm gloves, our breath fogging the frigid air as we set out for the bus stop. The route was familiar. Down our street, a right turn, then another street, and finally a left turn to stop. The neighborhood was silent, the snow muffling our footsteps, and the dim streetlights cast long shadows that seemed to shift as we walked. As we made the right turn and headed down the next street, I noticed a man walking toward us. He was still some distance away, his figure hazy in the pre-dawn gloom, but something about him set my nerves on edge. As he drew closer, I could make out more details, and each one tightened a knot in my stomach. He wore a black jacket, tattered and dirty, the fabric ripped at the seams. His hair was a tangled mess, matted with grime, and his beard was thick, brown, and unkempt, giving him a wild, disheveled look. But it was his face that chilled me most, a strange, crooked smirk that didn't match the cold emptiness in his eyes. In his hand, he held something I couldn't quite identify at first, but as he closed the distance, I saw it clearly, a knife, its blade glinting faintly under the streetlight. Terror gripped me, freezing me in place. My sister, standing beside me, let out a small gasp, her eyes wide with fear. We stood there, rooted the spot, our minds racing but our bodies paralyzed. The man was getting closer, his smirk widening, his steps deliberate. I didn't know what to do, didn't know how to protect my sister or myself. But then a voice inside me, instinct maybe, screamed to run. I grabbed my sister's hand, my grip tight, and yanked her around, pulling her back toward our house. "Run!" I shouted, my voice trembling but urgent. We took off, our boots slipping on the icy sidewalk, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. We sprinted down the street, the left turn to our house just ahead. I didn't dare look back, but I could feel the man's presence, a looming threat that spurred me faster. My sister was struggling to keep up, her shorter legs pumping furiously. Then disaster struck. She slipped on a patch of ice, her feet flying out from under her. She hit the ground hard, face first, and let out a wail of pain. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she clutched her face, her cries echoing in the quiet street. I knelt beside her, panic surging. "Get up, please," I begged, my voice cracking. "We have to go." But she just sat there, sobbing, too hurt or scared to move. I glanced back and my blood ran cold. The man was running now, his knife still in hand, his smirk replaced by a grim determination. He was closing the gap, his heavy footsteps crunching through the snow. My mind raced, torn between dragging my sister to her feet and facing the man myself. I was just a kid, small and powerless against an adult, but I couldn't leave her. Fear for her life, for my own, consumed me. I didn't know what to do, didn't know if we'd make it. Then, out of nowhere, salvation appeared. The wail of the siren cut through the air, and headlights flooded the street behind us. A police car screeched to a stop, its red and blue lights flashing like a beacon. The man froze, his eyes darting toward the car, and then he bolted, disappearing into the shadows of an alley or the woods. I couldn't tell which. A tall, white police officer stepped out, his face etched with concern as he approached us. "What's wrong, kids?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm, the kind that made you feel safe even in the worst moments. I was shaking, my words tumbling out in a terrified rush. We were chased by a man and my sister fell down," I said, clutching my sister's hand as she continued to cry. The officer's eyes softened and he knelt beside us, his presence a shield against the fear still clawing at me. He carefully picked up my sister, cradling her in his arms, and carried her to the police car. I followed close behind, my legs wobbly but moving on instinct. He set her in the passenger seat, wrapping a blanket around us both to ward off the cold and shock. I climbed in beside her, my hand never leaving hers. "What's your name, kid?" the officer asked, his voice calm as he adjusted the blanket. "What happened to you and your sister?" I swallowed hard, trying to steady my voice. We were walking the bus stop, but man started chasing us with a knife. I said, the words spilling out as a terror replayed in my mind. The officer nodded, his expression serious but reassuring. He placed a hand on my shoulder. "Okay, how about I take you and your sister to the station? We'll call your parents and get a description of this guy." We drove to the police station, the warmth of the car a stark contrast to the icy fear still gripping me. When we arrived, they called our parents, who rushed in, their faces pale with worry. Mom and Dad enveloped us in tight hugs, their relief palpable as they held us close. I tried to describe the man, his dirty jacket, messy hair, scruffy beard, that awful smirk, but my young mind struggled to capture every detail. The police listened patiently, jotting down what I could recall, but it wasn't enough to pinpoint him. They searched the area, combing the streets and nearby woods, but the man had vanished, leaving no trace. A week later, my mom sat me down, her voice heavy with a mix of fear and gratitude. She told me something that made my stomach lurch. A few kids in our area had been kidnapped recently, and the police hadn't found them or the person responsible. She didn't say it outright, but I knew she wondered if it was the same man. The thought sent a chill through me, a realization of how close my sister and I had come to being part of that grim statistic. If that police officer hadn't shown up when he did, if his car hadn't rounded the corner at that exact moment, I don't know what would have happened. The memory of that man's smirk, the glint of his knife, still haunts me. Years later, as I write this, I often think back to that morning. The fear, the helplessness, the overwhelming relief when help arrived. It's all as vivid as if it happened yesterday. I wonder who that man was, where he went, and whether he was ever caught. But more than anything, I'm grateful for the twist of fate that saved us. That police officer, whoever he was, gave my sister and me a chance to grow up, to live our lives. And for that, I'll always be thankful. This story comes from a time when I was 15, living with my family in a large, old house in a small neighborhood. Our family was big, me, my parents, and my 3 younger brothers, and our home was one of the first built in the area, its creaky floors and high ceilings carrying the weight of years. Until the summer of 2014, we'd never experienced anything strange or paranormal in that house. It was just a place filled with the chaos of a bustling family. But that summer, something changed, and what happened still sends shivers down my spine. It all began about 2 weeks into the summer, when the days were long and the air thick with heat. My mom was driving home one afternoon when she spotted a yard sale a few streets over. Among the tables of knickknacks and secondhand goods, she found an old chair that caught her eye. She later described it as love at first sight. A piece that looked like it belonged in an elderly woman's room or retirement home, with ornate wooden arms and faded floral upholstery that spoke of another era. I can't recall every detail of its appearance, but I remember it was surprisingly elegant for something so dated, with a quiet dignity despite its worn fabric. Mom was thrilled, convinced it would add character to our living room. She bought it on the spot and told the sellers that my dad and I would pick it up later that day. About an hour and a half later, Dad got home from work, and we headed out to retrieve the chair. The house hosting the sale was modest, its lawn cluttered with items waiting for new owners. The chair sat among them, looking slightly out of place, as if it held stories no one had bothered to ask about. We loaded it into the back of Dad's truck, the wood creaking faintly as we secured it and drove home. Once there, we carried it up to the living room on the second floor of our house. Our home was split across 3 levels. My grandparents lived on the ground floor, while our family occupied the top 2. The living room was a central hub for us, a place where we gathered to watch TV or play games, and the chair found its spot near the couch, blending into the space like it had always been there. For the first few weeks, nothing seemed to miss. The chair sat quietly, a new fixture we barely noticed amid the rhythm of summer. But about 3 weeks after we brought it home, things took a turn. My parents had gone out shopping one afternoon, leaving me in charge of my 3 brothers. As the eldest at 15, I was used to babysitting, though it wasn't always easy keeping everyone in line. 2 of my brothers, both around 12 and 10, were holed up in their room on the 3rd floor, engrossed in their PlayStation 3, their shouts and laughter drifting down the stairs. My youngest brother, barely a year old, was napping in his crib in his own room, also on the 3rd floor. I'd set up a baby monitor to keep an ear on him, its soft static a constant background on. I was downstairs in the living room, sprawled on the couch, playing Call of Duty on my Xbox 360 with some friends online. The headset crackled with their banter, and I was deep in the game, my thumbs working the controller as I navigated the virtual battlefield. The old chair sat a few feet away, its floral pattern catching the afternoon light streaming through the window. Everything felt normal, just another lazy summer day. My parents had been gone for about an hour when the baby monitor suddenly came to life, my little brother's cries cutting through the game's gunfire. I sighed, knowing I'd have to pause. "Guys, I gotta go," I told my friends, pulling off a headset. "My brother's awake." I turned off the Xbox, the screen going dark, and stood to head upstairs. But as the room fell silent, a sound stopped me cold, a woman's voice, soft and soothing, coming to the baby monitor. "It's okay," she said, her tone gentle, almost maternal. "Don't cry." My heart lurched, a wave of dread washing over me. There was no one else in the house except my brothers, and none of them could sound like that. The voice was clear, unmistakable, and it was coming from my brother's room. Panic gripped me, my mind racing with possibilities. Had someone broken in? Was I imagining it? The words echoed in my head, each one tightening the knot in my chest. I didn't hesitate long. On instinct, I bolted to my room, just off the living room, and grabbed my metal baseball bat from the corner. Its weight was reassuring, a solid defense against whatever I might find. My hands trembled as I gripped it, my pulse pounding in my ears. I took the stairs 2 at a time, the bat raised, ready to swing. When I reached my brother's room, I pushed the door open, my breath catching as I scanned the space. There was no one there, just my little brother in his crib, his cries now softened to whimpers, his tiny hands clutching his blanket. The room was empty, the air still, but the hairs on my neck stood on end. I checked everywhere, under the crib, in the closet, behind the door. Nothing. I moved to the other rooms on the 3rd floor, my brothers still in their room, oblivious, their game blaring. "You guys hear anything?" I called, my voice shaky. They barely looked up, shaking their heads. I searched the entire upstairs, bat still in hand, but found no sign of an intruder. The layout of the house made it impossible for someone to slip out unnoticed. The stairs to the 2nd floor were at the far end of the hall, and to leave, they'd have to pass through another set of stairs to the ground floor. No one could have moved that fast, not without me hearing them. Yet the voice had been real, as clear as my own thoughts. I stood in the hallway, my brother now quiet in his crib, and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the summer heat. To this day, that moment freaks me out. That wasn't the end of it. Over the next 3 weeks, I started hearing something else. Semi-loud footsteps coming from the third floor, usually at night. They'd start suddenly, heavy and deliberate, pacing back and forth for about 5 minutes before stopping as abruptly as they began. At first, I thought I was imagining it, my mind still rattled by the baby monitor incident. I told myself it was the house settling, or maybe my brother sneaking around. But the footsteps had a rhythm that felt wrong. Too measured, too purposeful. I never mentioned it to my parents, not wanting to sound crazy, and I tried to brush it off, but each time I heard them, my unease grew. Then, something happened that I wasn't home for, a story I only heard from my mom. I'd gone to a friend's house for the weekend, eager for a break from the strange tension in our home. My parents were at home with my brothers, and Mom was working in her office on the second floor. She was a bookkeeper for a company, often buried in spreadsheets late into the evening. My youngest brother was napping in his room, the baby monitor on her desk, its soft hum a familiar companion. She was typing when she heard him start to cry, his wails crackling through the speaker. She finished entering a few numbers, planning to head upstairs, but as she stood, she heard it again, a woman's voice, faint but clear, speaking to my brother. She couldn't make out the words this time, but the tone was unmistakable, the same soothing cadence I'd heard. Mom's heart raced. She hurried upstairs, her steps quickening with each cry from the monitor. By the time she reached his room, she was almost running. She burst through the door, expecting to find someone, but the room was empty, just like before. My brother was in his crib, his cries softening, and the air felt heavy, as if someone had just left. She checked the room, the closets, the entire third floor, but found nothing. No one could have slipped past her. The stairs were too far, the house too quiet for someone to escape unnoticed. She stood there, her hands shaking, staring at the crib, the weight of the unknown pressing down on her. When I got home that night, my parents called me into their bedroom for a serious talk. The atmosphere was tense, their faces etched with worry. They sat me down on their bed and asked if I'd noticed anything strange over the past few weeks, anything out of the ordinary. I hesitated, then spilled everything about the baby monitor incident. The woman's voice, the words, "It's okay," and "Don't cry," the empty room, my frantic search with the bat. As I spoke, Mom's eyes widened, her face paling. When I finished, she looked like she'd seen a ghost. "I heard it too," she whispered, her voice trembling. She recounted her own experience, the voice she'd heard just that weekend, and the chilling realization that we both encountered the same thing. Dad, who'd been quiet, spoke up. "I've been hearing footsteps upstairs," he admitted, his tone reluctant, as if he didn't want to believe it himself. "At night," pacing back and forth. I thought it was just a house, but he trailed off, his jaw tight. The room felt smaller, the air thick with shared fear. Mom's mind was racing, searching for an explanation. "Something's changed," she said, her voice firm despite the tremor in it. "This never happened before. What's different?" She thought hard, her brow furrowed, and then it hit her. "The chair," she said, her eyes locking on mine. "It's the only thing we brought into the house recently." The idea sounded wild, but the more we talked, the more it made sense. The chair was the only new addition, and the strange occurrences had started soon after it arrived. Mom was convinced it was haunted, that something attached to it had followed it into our home. She didn't want it in the house another day. "We're getting rid of it," she declared, her voice resolute. The next morning, we loaded the chair into Dad's truck and drove it to his workplace, where we tossed it into a dumpster. I watched as it landed among the trash, its floral pattern disappearing under a pile of debris. It felt like we were closing a door, banishing whatever had come with it. After that, the footsteps stopped, the voices ceased, and the house felt like ours again. But the story doesn't end there. Early the next year, we bought a new house in a different neighborhood and prepared to move. On one of the final days, I went back to the old house with my best friend and Dad to grab the last of our belongings. just a few boxes and odds and ends. Dad was outside, loading the car, while my friend and I were tasked with locking up. The house felt empty, its rooms echoing with the absence of our things. But there was something else, a heaviness in the air, like we were being watched. My friend felt it too, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by a nervous glance over his shoulder. "This place gives me the creeps," he muttered, and I nodded, my skin prickling. As we moved through the second floor, checking doors and windows, a sound stopped us dead in our tracks. Footsteps, loud, rapid, and unmistakable, came charging down the hallway toward us. They weren't the slow, pacing steps I'd heard before. These were aggressive, like someone or something was running straight at us. My heart leapt into my throat. "S-H*T this," I said, my voice a panic whisper. My friend didn't need convincing. We bolted for the front door, fumbling with the lock in our haste. I slammed it shut behind us, twisting the key with shaking hands. And we sprinted to the car, our breaths coming in sharp gasps. As we piled into the car, I glanced back at the house, my eyes drawn to the front door. For a fleeting moment, I swore I saw a figure, a woman, her silhouette faint but distinct, standing in the doorway, watching us leave. Her presence felt heavy, almost mournful, as if she resented our departure. I blinked, and she was gone, the door just an empty frame. My friend saw it too, his face pale as he muttered, "Did you see that?" I didn't answer, too shaken to speak. We drove away, the house shrinking in the rearview mirror, and I vowed never to go back. To this day, I've kept that promise. The memory of those footsteps and that ghostly figure a reminder of something I can't explain. This happened a few years ago, when I was living with my boyfriend at his parents' house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Their home was spacious, with a finished basement that served as a cozy hangout spot for us. The basement had a distinct vibe, dimly lit, with plush carpeting, a big TV mounted on a wall, and a heavy punching bag hanging in one corner, swaying slightly whenever someone brushed past it. We spent a lot of time down there, watching movies, playing games, or just relaxing on the worn leather couch. It felt like our own little sanctuary, a place where we could escape the world. But two incidents in that basement shook me to my core, leaving me with a lingering unease that I still can't fully shake. The first incident happened one evening when my boyfriend and I were down in the basement, curled up on the couch for a movie night. The room was warm, the glow of the TV casting flickering shadows across the walls. We were about halfway through the film, engrossed in the plot, when a loud whooshing sound erupted behind us. It was a furnace, tucked away in a corner of the basement, roaring to life with an intensity I'd never heard before. The flames inside flared up, visible through the small glass window on the furnace door, blazing a vivid orange that seemed almost unnatural. The sound was deafening, like a jet engine revving up, and the heat rolled out in waves, making the air feel thick and oppressive. I froze, my heart pounding as I stared at the furnace. It wasn't just the noise or the heat, it was the way the flames seemed to pulse, almost alive, as if they were trying to break free. My boyfriend, equally startled, jumped up from the couch, his eyes wide. "What the hell is that?" he said, his voice tight with alarm. We stood there, watching as the furnace roared for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a minute. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it shut off. The flames died down, the noise faded to a soft hum, and the basement returned to its usual quiet. We exchanged uneasy glances, both of us rattled. "That's never happened before," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. He checked the furnace, poking around the controls, but everything seemed normal. We tried to laugh it off, chalking it up to a glitch, but the incident left a knot in my stomach. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that the basement wasn't as safe as it had once seemed. The second incident was even more unsettling, and it happened a few weeks later. My boyfriend was out with friends one night, leaving me alone in the house. His parents were upstairs, probably asleep as it was late. Around 10 p.m., I decided to head down to the basement to do some reading, craving the quiet solitude of space. I grabbed a book from the shelf, a thick novel I'd been working through, and settled onto the couch, the soft glow of a floor lamp casting a warm circle of light around me. The basement was still, the only sound the faint hum of the furnace in its normal, subdued state. I opened my book, losing myself in the pages, the story pulling me in as the minutes ticked by. I'd been reading for about half an hour when I felt it, a sudden, forceful pressure on the back of my head, like an invisible hand pushing me forward. My face was shoved into the open book, the pages crumpling against my nose. I gasped, my heart leaping into my throat as I jerked upright, dropping the book onto the couch. My hands flew to the back of my head, expecting to feel something. Someone, but there was nothing there. The air felt heavy, charged with a presence I couldn't see. My pulse raced, my eyes darting around the basement, searching for an explanation. The punching bag in the corner was still, the TV dark, the furnace silent. I was alone, or so it seemed. Before I could process what had happened, another sound broke the silence. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the far side of the basement near the staircase. They weren't loud, but they were unmistakable, each step echoing with a weight that made my skin crawl. I held my breath, straining to listen, hoping it was just the house settling or my imagination running wild. But then I heard something worse. The basement door at the top of the stairs creaked open, its hinges groaning, as if someone had pushed it slowly, deliberately. My stomach dropped. I hadn't touched that door. It had been closed when I came down, and no one else was supposed to be in the basement. Panic surged through me. I leapt from the couch, my book forgotten, and sprinted for the stairs, my bare feet pounding against the carpet. The footsteps behind me seemed to pick up, matching my pace, though I didn't dare look back. I reached the staircase and took the steps two at a time, my hands gripping the railing for balance. The door was wide open, its frame a dark silhouette against the faint light from the upstairs hallway. I burst through it, slamming it shut behind me, and fumbled with the lock, my fingers trembling so badly I could barely turn the knob. I leaned against the door, my chest heaving, waiting for the sound of footsteps to follow, but the house was silent. No one was there, no one I could see, at least. I stood there for a long moment, my heart still racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The pressure on my head, the footsteps, the door, it was too much to dismiss as a trick of the mind. I wasn't prone to hallucinations. I wasn't tired or stressed, and I hadn't been drinking or taking anything that could explain it. The basement, once a place of comfort, now felt like a trap, its shadows hiding something I couldn't name. I didn't go back down there that night, choosing instead to wait upstairs in the living room, the TV on low to drown out the silence. When my boyfriend got home later, I told him everything. The force on my head, the footsteps, the door swinging open on its own. His face grew serious, and he admitted something that made my blood run cold. "I've seen something weird down there too," he said, his voice low. "A few weeks ago, I was working out, hitting the punching bag, and I swear it moved on its own. Not just a sway, like I'd hit it. It swung back at me, hard, like someone pushed it." He'd brushed it off at the time, not wanting to sound paranoid, but after my experience, he was starting to wonder if something was wrong with that basement. We didn't have answers, and we didn't know what to do. His parents, practical and skeptical, dismissed our stories when we brought them up, suggesting it was just the house's quirks or our imaginations. But we knew better. Something was in that basement, something that didn't belong. After that night, I avoided going down there alone, and even when we were together, I couldn't relax. The memory of that invisible hand, the sound of those footsteps, and the sight of that open door haunted me. We eventually moved out, finding a place of our own, and I was relieved to leave that house and its basement behind. To this day, I don't know what was down there, but I'm certain it wasn't just my mind playing tricks. Whatever it was, it wanted to be noticed, and I'll never forget the fear it left behind. This story takes me back to when I was 16, living in a small town where the days stretched long and the nights were filled with restless energy. My two best friends, let's call them Jake and Ethan, and I were inseparable, the kind of trio that thrived on adventure and a touch of recklessness. We were all about our dirt bikes, tearing to the back roads and trails, the roar of the engines a soundtrack to our youth. Our town was surrounded by sprawling woods, dense and untamed, with paths that wound deep into the wilderness. One summer night, fueled by boredom and the thrill of the unknown, we decided to explore a part of those woods we'd never ventured into before, a decision that would lead to the most terrifying experience of my life. It was a warm evening, the air thick with the scent of pine and earth, the sky a deep indigo dotted with stars. Jake, Ethan, and I met up at the edge of town, our dirt bikes gleaming under the streetlights. We were in high spirits, joking and shoving each other as we strapped on our helmets, the anticipation of a new ride buzzing through us. Jake, always the boldest, suggested we head toward a trail we heard about but never tried, one that led to an old, abandoned house deep in the woods. The idea of exploring a creepy, forgotten place was irresistible to three teenagers looking for a story to tell. "Come on," Jake said, his grin wide. "Let's see what's out there." Ethan, the cautious one, hesitated for a moment, his brow furrowing. "You sure? It's pretty far out," he said, but Jake's enthusiasm was infectious, and I was already sold. "It'll be fine," I chimed in, revving my bike. "What's the worst that could happen?" Famous last words. We set off, our bikes kicking up dust as we left the town behind, and plunged into the forest. The trail was narrow, overgrown with roots and brambles that snagged at our tires, but we navigated with ease, the beams of our headlights cutting through the darkness. The woods were alive with sound, crickets chirping, leaves rustling in the breeze. But as we rode deeper, a strange quiet settled in, like the forest was holding its breath. It took us about 20 minutes to reach the house, and when we did, we stopped short, our engines idling as we took it in. The house was a ruin, its wooden frame sagging under the weight of time, the windows shattered and boarded up, the roof caved in at one end. Vines snaked up the walls, reclaiming the structure for the forest, and the air around it felt heavy, as if the place itself was watching us. We cut our engines, the silence rushing in like a wave. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, his voice low. "This place gives me the creeps," he said, glancing at the dark windows. Jake, undeterred, hopped off his bike and strode toward the house, his flashlight beam dancing across the peeling paint. "Don't be a wimp," he called back, his tone teasing. "Let's check it out." I followed, my curiosity outweighing the unease prickling at the back of my neck. Ethan trailed behind, muttering under his breath, but he wasn't about to let us go in alone. We stepped onto the creaking porch, the wood groaning under our weight, and peered through the doorway. Inside, the house was a mess. Broken furniture scattered across the floor, cobwebs draping the corners, and a musty smell that made my nose wrinkle. Our flashlights revealed glimpses of what might have been a living room, the remnant of a life long abandoned. We'd only been inside for a minute, poking around the debris, when a sound stopped us cold, a blood-curdling scream, unmistakably male, ripping through the silence from somewhere deep in the woods. It wasn't an animal, not a coyote or a fox. It was human, raw, and filled with terror or rage. I couldn't tell which. My heart slammed against my ribs, my flashlight shaking in my hand. Jake's bravado vanished, his face paling as he whispered, "What the hell was that?" Ethan was already backing toward the door, his eyes wide. "We need to go now," he said, his voice trembling. I nodded, my mouth dry, the scream still echoing in my ears. We didn't need convincing. Whatever had made that sound was not something we wanted to meet. We scrambled back to our bikes, our boots slipping on the uneven ground, and fired up the engines. The roar of the motors was a relief, drowning out the oppressive silence. But as we peeled away from the house, another sound cut through the noise, the unmistakable crunch of tires on gravel, coming from the trail behind us. I glanced over my shoulder, my stomach dropping as I saw headlights piercing the darkness, moving fast. A car was chasing us, its engine growling like a predator on the hunt. Panic surged through me, my hands gripping the handlebars so tightly my knuckles turned white. "Go, go, go!" Jake shouted, his voice barely audible over the wind and engines. We pushed our bikes to their limits, the trail blurring beneath us as we raced through the woods. The car was relentless, its headlights growing closer, illuminating the trees in stark, eerie relief. The trail was too narrow for a car to navigate easily, yet kept pace, weaving through the underbrush with an unnatural precision. I could hear Ethan yelling something, his words lost in the chaos. But his fear was palpable. My mind raced. Try and make sense of it. Who was in that car? Why were they after us? Had the scream come from them? Or were they chasing whatever had made it? The house flashed through my thoughts, its dark windows and heavy air. Had we stumbled into something we weren't supposed to see? We rode for what felt like an eternity. The car never letting up, its presence a constant threat at our backs. My arms ached, my heart pounded, and every bump in the trail threatened to throw me off. Finally, after about 10 minutes of pure terror, we burst out of the woods and onto a paved road near the edge of town. The car's headlights were still behind us, but as we hit the asphalt, it slowed, then stopped, its lights flickering before vanishing into the trees. We didn't stop to look back, tearing through the streets until we reached Jake's house, the closest safe haven. We skidded to a stop in his driveway, our bikes clattered into the ground as we stumbled inside, slamming the door behind us. We collapsed in his living room, gasping for breath, our clothes damp with sweat. Jake was the first to speak, his voice shaky but defiant. "What the hell was that?" he said again, running a hand through his hair. Ethan, still pale, shook his head. "I told you that place was bad news," he muttered, his hands trembling. I couldn't speak, my mind replaying the scream, the headlights, the car that had chased us through the woods. "We need to tell someone." I finally managed, my voice hoarse. Jake nodded, and we called the police, our words tumbling out as we tried to explain what had happened. 2 officers arrived within the hour, their faces skeptical but professional. We told them everything. The abandoned house, the scream, the car chase, our voices overlapping in our urgency. They listened, jotting down notes, and promised to check out the trail and the house. "Stay put," one of them said, his tone firm. "And don't go back out there tonight." We nodded, too shaken to argue. The police returned later, their expressions unreadable. They'd found the house, they said, but no car, no tire tracks, no sign of anyone in the woods. The trail was too narrow for a car to have driven through without leaving a trace. They added, which only deepened our confusion. "Maybe you kids got spooked," the other officer suggested, his tone gentle but dismissive. "Old places like that can mess with your head." We knew they didn't believe us, but we also knew what we'd seen and heard. That scream wasn't our imagination, and those headlights had been real. Their glare burned into my memory. We never went back to that house, and we avoided that part of the woods from then on. The experience bonded us in a way, a shared trauma that we'd recount in hushed tones over the years, but it also left us with questions that never found answers. Who, or what, had screamed in the woods? Who was in that car, and why had they chased us? And what was it about that house that felt so wrong? To this day, I can't ride past those woods without feeling a chill, a reminder of the night we escaped something I still don't understand. When I was 16, I did something I'm not proud of, something that spiraled into one of the most unsettling experiences of my life. It was 2007, and like many teenagers, I was obsessed with the internet, spending hours on platforms like MySpace, where I could reinvent myself in ways the real world didn't allow. I was a shy kid, awkward and unsure, but online, I could be anyone. That's how I ended up creating a fake profile, pretending to be Bill Kaulitz, the charismatic lead singer of the German band Tokyo Hotel, whose music was taking the world by storm. It started as a harmless prank, a way to mess around and feel a fleeting sense of power, but quickly turned into something far more dangerous. Setting up the profile was easy. I used photos of Bill I found online. His signature spiky black hair, heavy eyeliner, and androgynous style made him instantly recognizable. I mimicked his persona, adopting his flamboyant flair and quirky humor, crafting posts and messages that felt true to his public image. At first, it was just for laughs, a silly experiment to see how people would react. I'd log in after school, sprawled on my bed with my clunky laptop, giggling as fans left comments or sent friend requests, unaware they were talking to a random teenager in a small town. The thrill of deception was addictive, a secret I kept even from my closest friends. But I never expected anyone to take it seriously or to get so close. One user stood out among the flood of messages. A girl who called herself DA. She was a die-hard Tokyo Hotel fan. Her profile plastered with band photos and lyrics, her posts brimming with enthusiasm. She reached out early on, her messages bubbly and earnest, gushing about Bill's music and style. I responded in character, keeping up the act, and soon we were chatting regularly. DA was easy to talk to, her words warm and genuine, and I found myself looking forward to our conversations. She'd share stories about her life, her school, her dreams, her love of the band, and I'd reply with fabricated tales of life as a rock star, weaving details I'd gleaned from interviews and fan sites. It felt harmless, like a game we were both playing, though I was the only one who knew the rules. Over time, our chats grew more personal. DA opened up about her struggles, her hopes, and I found myself sharing bits of my real self, carefully disguised as Bill's thoughts. I told her about my love for music, my insecurities, my dreams of escaping my small town, all while staying in character. It was a strange duality, lying through my teeth but feeling oddly connected to her. She'd send photos sometimes, not of herself but of things in her life. Her cat curled up on her bed, a sunset over her neighborhood, a Tokyo Hotel poster on her wall. I'd respond with generic compliments, careful not to ask for anything too personal, but I saved every photo, drawn to the glimpses of her world. Our friendship, built on a lie, became a highlight of my days, a secret escape from my mundane reality. About 6 months into our chats, DA started pushing to meet in person. "If you're ever touring near me, you have to let me know," she'd write, her messages tinged with excitement. I dodged these requests, making vague excuses about a busy tour schedule or recording sessions, anything to keep the illusion alive. But she was persistent, and her insistence made me uneasy. I liked DA, or at least a version of her I knew through our chats, but meeting was impossible. I wasn't Bill Collett's, just a kid hiding behind a screen. The guilt began to creep in, a nagging voice reminding me that I was deceiving someone who trusted me. Yet I couldn't bring myself to stop. The connection, however fake, felt too real to let go. Then, one evening, everything changed. I was home alone, my parents out for the night. The house quiet except for the hum of my laptop. I logged into MySpace, expecting our usual banter, when a new message from DA popped up. Attached was a photo, and my heart stopped as I opened it. It was a picture of my house, my actual house, taken from the street, the familiar blue siding and white trim unmistakable under the glow of a streetlight. The front yard, the mailbox, the crooked tree by the driveway. It was all there, captured in eerie detail. My hands trembled, a cold sweat breaking out across my skin. How did she have this? How did she know where I lived? Another message followed, this one with a second photo. This time, it was taken from outside my bedroom window, the angle close enough to show the posters on my walls, the cluttered desk, the faint reflection of my laptop screen. My breath caught, my pulse racing as I spun around, half expecting to see someone staring through the glass. The blinds were open, the night beyond them dark and impenetrable. I scrambled to the window, yanking the blinds shut, my heart pounding so hard I could barely think. A third message arrived, this one text only. "I know who you really are." The words hit like a punch, each one dripping with menace. A, or whoever was behind her account, knew I wasn't Bill Kaulitz. They knew where I lived, and they were close enough to take pictures of my home, my room, my life. Panic consumed me. I slammed my laptop shut, as if that could erase what I'd seen, and ran to lock every door and window in the house, my hands shaking so badly I fumbled with the bolts. The silence of the house felt oppressive, every creak and groan amplifying my fear. I grabbed my phone, ready to call my parents, but stopped. What would I say? That I'd been catfishing someone, and now they were stalking me? The shame burned as hot as the fear, but I couldn't stay silent. I texted my best friend, spilling everything in a frantic message. The fake profile DA, the photos. Someone's outside my house. I typed, my fingers trembling. I don't know what to do. My friend replied instantly, urging me to call the police, but I hesitated. What if this was just a prank? What if DA was bluffing? But those photos weren't fake. They were real, taken from angles that meant someone had been right outside, watching me. I sat in the living room, the lights off to avoid drawing attention, clutching a kitchen knife I grabbed for protection. Every sound, a car passing, a branch tapping the window, set my heart racing. I kept checking my phone, half expecting another message from DA, but none came. The silence was almost worse, a void filled with the unknown. When my parents got home, I broke down and told them everything. The fake profile, the months of chats, the photos, the message. Their faces shifted from confusion, anger to fear. Their voices sharp as they demanded to know why I'd done something so reckless. But they didn't hesitate to act. Dad grabbed a flashlight and checked the yard, finding no one, though the darkness felt alive with unseen eyes. Mom called the police, her voice steady despite the worry etched on her face. 2 officers arrived, their flashlights sweeping the property as they listened to my story. I showed them photos on my laptop, my cheeks burning with embarrassment as I explained the catfishing. They took it seriously, jotting down details and asking about DA's profile. But there wasn't much they could do without more information. Lock your doors, keep your blinds closed, and stay off that account. One officer said, his tone firm but kind, "We'll patrol the area tonight." That night, I barely slept, jumping at every sound, the images of my house and room seared into my mind. The next day, I deleted the fake profile, scrubbing every trace of Bill Kaulitz from MySpace. I blocked DA's account, my hand shaking as I clicked the button, and vowed never to do anything like that again. The guilt was overwhelming, a heavy weight that mingled with my fear. I'd lied to someone, built a friendship on deception, and now I was paying the price. But the fear was sharper. Who was there, really? How had they found me? Had they been watching me for days, weeks? The thought of someone standing outside my window, close enough to photograph my life, made my skin crawl. The police never found out who Dia was. They traced the IP address of her account, but it led to a public library in the city hours away. A dead end. No more photos or messages came, and no one showed up at our house again. But the experience left a mark. I became paranoid, always checking the locks, closing the blind before dark, glancing over my shoulder when I left the house. The internet, once a playground, felt like a minefield, a place where secrets could turn dangerous. I never told anyone outside my family and my best friend, too ashamed of my role in it all. Looking back, I know I was reckless, playing with someone's trust for my own amusement. But I also know that what happened wasn't just my fault. Someone out there took it too far, and I'll never know why. The memory of those photos, of that chilling message, still haunts me, a reminder how close I came to something I can't fully understand. This story unfolds in a sprawling, centuries-old house in a small town in England, where I lived with my family when I was 16. The house was a relic, its stone walls steeped in history, its creaky wooden floors and high, beamed ceilings whispering tales of generations past. My parents, my younger brother, and I had moved there a year earlier, drawn by its charm and the promise of quieter life. The town was quaint, surrounded by rolling hills and dense woods, and our home stood at its edge, a grand but weathered structure that felt both majestic and slightly foreboding. For the most part, life there was peaceful, filled with the usual rhythms of school and family. But one night, an encounter in that house shook me to my core, leaving me questioning what I thought I knew about the world. It was a chilly autumn evening, the kind where the air bites at your skin and the wind rattles the windows. My parents had gone out to a local pub for a rare night with friends, leaving me in charge of my brother, who was 12 and already lost in his video games upstairs. I was in the living room, curled up on the overstuffed sofa with a book, the fire in the hearth crackling softly. The house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of settling wood and the distant hum of my brother's game. I'd always felt safe in that house, its thick walls a shield against the outside world, but that night, something felt different, a subtle shift in the air, like a shadow passing over the moon. Around 9 p.m., I decided to make some tea, a habit I'd picked up living in England. I set my book down and headed to the kitchen, a large room with exposed stone walls and a heavy oak table that could seat a dozen. The kettle was on the stove, and as I filled it with water, I heard a faint noise, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingers drumming on wood. I paused, the kettle still in hand, and listened. The sound was coming from the direction of the back door, which led to the garden and the woods beyond. It wasn't loud, but it was deliberate, each tap precise and evenly spaced. My first thought was that it was an animal, maybe a branch brushing against the door in the wind, but the rhythm was too human, too intentional. I set the kettle on the stove and moved toward the door, my socks silent on the cold stone floor. The back door had a small, frosted glass panel, but it was too dark outside to see anything clearly. The tapping continued, steady and unhurried, and a chill ran down my spine. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob, remembering my dad's rule: never open a door at night without checking first. I stepped to the side, peering through the kitchen window that overlooked the garden. The night was pitch black, the garden swallowed by shadows, but I could just make out the outline of the stone path leading to the woods. There was no one there, no figure, no movement, just a sway of trees in the wind. Yet the tapping didn't stop. I backed away from the door, my heart beating faster, and decided to ignore it. Maybe it was nothing, I told myself, just the house playing tricks. I turned on the stove, the hiss of the gas a small comfort, and busied myself with the tea, grabbing a mug and a tea bag from the cupboard. But as I reached for the sugar, the tapping changed. It grew louder, more insistent, morphing into a sharp knocking that echoed to the kitchen. I froze, the mug slipping from my hand and clattering onto the counter. The sound was unmistakable now, a demand for attention, and it was coming from the back door, no question. My stomach twisted, a mix of fear and curiosity pulling me in opposite directions. I grabbed a flashlight from the drawer, its weight reassuring in my hand, and crept back to the window. I shone the beam outside, sweeping across the garden, but the light revealed nothing, just the empty path, the overgrown shrubs, the dark line of trees in the distance. The knocking stopped abruptly, the silence heavier than the sound had been. I stood there, straining to hear, my breath shallow. Then from the other side of the door came a new sound, a low, guttural voice, speaking in a language I didn't recognize. It wasn't English, nor any language I'd heard before. Its cadence strange and guttural, like a chant or a curse. The voice was deep, unmistakably male, and it sent a jolt of terror through me, my legs nearly giving out. I stumbled back, the flashlight shaking in my grip, and ran to the living room, slamming the kitchen door behind me. My heart was racing, my mind scrambling for an explanation. Was it a prank? A neighbor messing around? But no one lived close enough, and the voice had been too close, too real, right on the other side of the door. I grabbed my phone from the sofa and texted my parents. "Someone's at the back door. I heard a voice. Come home. My fingers trembled as I typed, the words feeling inadequate for the fear gripping me. I didn't call the police. Maybe I should have, but I was too rattled to think straight, and I didn't want to scare my brother. I crept upstairs to check on him, the flashlight still in hand, its beam cutting through the dim hallway. His door was cracked open, and I peeked inside. He was sprawled on his bed, headphones on, oblivious to the world as he played his game. You okay? I asked, my voice shaky. He glanced up, annoyed at the interruption, and nodded. Yeah, why? He said, pulling off one headphone. Just stay up here, okay? Don't go downstairs. He gave me a weird look, but shrugged, turning back to his screen. I closed his door, relieved he hadn't heard anything, and headed back to the living room, my nerves on edge. I sat on the sofa, the flashlight clutched tightly, my phone in my lap, waiting for my parents to reply. The house felt alive with menace, every shadow a potential threat. I kept glancing at the kitchen door, half expecting it to burst open, but the knocking didn't resume and the voice didn't return. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 15 minutes, my phone buzzed with text from Mom. On our way, stay safe, lock everything. I double-checked the front door, the windows. Every lock I could think of, the routine grounded me even as my fear lingered. When my parents got home, I spilled everything. The tapping, the knocking, the voice, the strange language. Dad's face hardened, and he grabbed a heavy torch from the hall closet. Heading straight for the back door. Stay here, he said, his voice firm. Mom pulled me close, her arm around my shoulders, her face pale with worry. Dad stepped outside, his torch beam sweeping the garden, but he returned a few minutes later, shaking his head. Nothing out there, he said, though his tone was uneasy. No footprints, no signs of anyone. The ground's too dry to tell. He locked the door, double-checking the bolt, and sat down with us, his brow furrowed. We stayed up late, talking it over, trying to make sense of it. Mom suggested it might have been a traveler or a prankster, but the voice didn't fit. No one in our town spoke like that, and the woods were too far from any campsite. Dad wondered if it was a wind or an animal, but I knew what I'd heard, a human voice, deliberate and chilling. I couldn't shake the image of someone standing just outside, hidden in the dark, speaking words meant for no one but me. My parents decided to call the police the next morning just to be safe, and they installed a security camera by the back door a few days later. The police came, took my statement, and patrolled the area, but they found nothing, no tracks, no witnesses, no explanation. For weeks after, I was on edge, jumping at every noise, avoiding the kitchen at night. The camera never caught anything unusual, just the occasional fox or gust of wind. But I couldn't relax. I started researching the history of the house, digging through local records of the library, hoping for answers. The house was old, built in the 1700s, and had seen its share of owners, but there were no ghost stories, no dark secrets that I could find. Yet the memory of that voice lingered, its guttural tone replaying in my dreams. My brother, blissfully unaware, never noticed a thing, and I was glad for it. I didn't want him to feel the fear that clung to me. Years later, I still think about that night. The house is long behind us, sold when we moved away from my dad's job, but the memory remains vivid, a puzzle with missing pieces. Was it a person playing a cruel trick? Or something else? Something tied to the ancient stones of that house? Something that spoke in a tongue I'll never understand? I don't know, and maybe I never will. But I do know this. That night, something was at our door, and it wasn't there by chance. The thought of it, of what might have happened if I'd opened that door, still sends a shiver down my spine. My name is Emily, and this story comes from when I was 14, living with my family in a cozy house in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Ohio. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, where kids rode bikes until dusk, and neighbors waved from their porches. Our house was modest but warm. with a big backyard that backed onto a narrow strip of woods, more a tangle of trees and underbrush than a forest. Life was simple, filled with school, friends, and the small dramas of adolescence. But one summer night in 2009, something happened that shattered my sense of safety and left me with memory I can't shake, no matter how many years pass. It was late July, the air thick with humidity, the kind of heat that clings to your skin even after the sun goes down. My parents had gone to bed early, exhausted from a long week, and my younger brother, Tim, who was 10, was already asleep in his room down the hall. I was in the living room, sprawled on the couch, watching a rerun of some cheesy sitcom on the TV. The windows were open to catch the faint breeze, the curtains swaying lazily, and the hum of cicadas filled the night outside. I was half asleep, the glow of the screen lulling me into a drowsy haze, when a sound snapped me awake, a sharp, deliberate knock on the front door. I sat up, my heart giving a quick thud. It was past 10 p.m., way too late for visitors, especially in our sleepy neighborhood. The knock came again, louder this time, 3 firm raps that echoed to the quiet house. I muted the TV, the sudden silence making the sound even more jarring. My first thought was that it might be a neighbor, maybe someone needing help, but something about the knocking felt off, too purposeful, too insistent. I slid off the couch, my bare feet cold against the hardwood floor, and tiptoed to the front door, my pulse quickening with each step. The door had a small peephole, and I pressed my eye to it, expecting to see a familiar face. But there was no one there, just the empty porch, bathed in the dim glow of the streetlight across the road. The welcome mat was undisturbed, the potted plants still, no sign of anyone having been there. I frowned, confused, and checked again, angling my head to see the edges of the porch. Nothing. The knocking had stopped, and the night outside was still, the cicadas hum unbroken. I told myself it was probably kids pulling a prank, ringing the bell and running off, though the knock had been too heavy for that, too adult. I was about to head back to the couch when another knock came, this time from the back door, at the far end of the house. My stomach lurched, a cold prickle of fear crawling up my neck. The back door led to the backyard, which was fenced in and bordered by the woods, not a place anyone would casually wander into at night. I froze, my hand still on the front door's knob, listening as the knocks came again, slow and deliberate, each one like a heartbeat in the silence. My mind raced. Who could be out there? Why would someone knock on both doors? I thought about waking my parents, but their room was upstairs, and I didn't want to leave the living room, not with that sound pulling me toward the unknown. I grabbed my phone from the couch, my fingers trembling as I clutched it, and crept toward the kitchen, where the back door was. The house felt bigger in the dark, every shadow a potential threat, the familiar creaks of the floorboards now menacing. The kitchen was lit only by the faint glow of the stove clock, casting eerie green light across the counter. The back door had a window with a thin curtain, and I hesitated, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I didn't want to look, but I had to know. I edged closer, pulling the curtain aside just enough to peek out. At first, I saw nothing but the dark outline of the backyard, the swing set, the fence, the trees swaying in the breeze. Then my eyes caught something, a figure, tall and shadowy, standing just beyond the fence, right at the edge of the woods. It was human-shaped, but the darkness swallowed any details, making it look more like a silhouette cut from the night itself. My breath caught, my hand tightening around the phone. The figure wasn't moving, just standing there, facing the house, as if watching me. The knocking had stopped, but the silence was worse, heavy with the weight of that motionless figure. I let the curtain fall, my legs shaky, and backed away from the door, my mind screaming at me to do something. I dialed my dad's number, my fingers fumbling, and waited as it rang, each second stretching into eternity. He picked up on the third ring, his voice groggy. "Emily? What's wrong?" he mumbled. "Dad, someone's knocking on the doors," I whispered, my voice trembling. Front and back. "There's someone outside in the woods. I saw them." The sleep vanished from his tone. "Stay where you are. I'm coming down." I heard his footsteps on the stairs, heavy and quick, and within moments, he was in the kitchen, his face tense. He was in his pajamas, but he grabbed a flashlight and the old baseball bat we kept in the hall closet. Mom appeared behind him, her eyes wide with worry, pulling her robe tight. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice sharp with fear. I pointed to the back door, my words tumbling out. Someone knocked on the front door, then the back. I looked outside, and there's someone standing by the woods, just watching. Dad's jaw tightened, and he moved to the back door, shining the flashlight through the window. The beam cut through the darkness, sweeping across the yard, but the figure was gone. No shadow, no movement, just the empty fence and the trees. Dad opened the door, the bat in one hand, and stepped onto the back porch, his flashlight scanning the woods. "Stay inside," he said over his shoulder, his voice firm but edged with unease. Mom grabbed my arm, pulling me close, her grip tight. We watched from the doorway as Dad walked to the fence, his light darting between the trees. The night was still. The cicadas hummed the only sound, but the air felt charged like a storm was about to break. After a few minutes, Dad came back, his face grim. "Nothing out there," he said, locking the door behind him. "No footprints, no sign of anyone. But I don't like this." Mom was already on the phone, calling the police, her voice steady but urgent. "We had someone knocking on our doors, and my daughter saw a figure outside," she told the dispatcher, her hand shaking slightly. Dad kept the bat close, his eyes scanning the windows, while I sat at the kitchen table, my phone still clutched in my hand. The fear hadn't left me. The image of that shadowy figure burned into my mind. Who was it? Why were they there? The knocking, the way they'd stood so still, it felt deliberate, like they wanted me to see them. The police arrived about 20 minutes later, 2 officers with flashlights and serious expressions. They listened as I recounted everything. The knocks, the figure, the eerie timing. Dad showed them the backyard, pointing out where I'd seen the person, and they searched the area, their beams cutting through the woods. They found nothing. No tracks, no broken branches, no evidence anyone had been there. Could have been a prank. One officer said, his tone kind but skeptical. "Kids sometimes do this, especially in the summer." But I knew it wasn't kids. The figure had been too tall, too still, and the knocking too purposeful. The officer stayed for a while, patrolling the neighborhood, and told us to call if anything else happened. Dad nailed the back door shut that night, just to be safe, and Mom made me sleep in their room, a pallet of blankets on the floor beside their bed. I didn't argue. I was too scared to be alone. Tim slept through it all, blissfully unaware, and we didn't tell him, not wanting to frighten him. But I barely slept, jumping at every sound, the image of that figure replaying in my head. The next day, Dad installed motion sensor lights around the house, their harsh glow a constant reminder of that night. For weeks, I was on edge, avoiding the backyard, keeping the curtains closed after dark. I'd stare at the woods from my bedroom window, half expecting to see that figure again, but it never returned. My parents checked the neighborhood, asking if anyone else had heard or seen anything, but no one had. The police followed up once, but with no new incidents. There was little they could do. I tried to convince myself it was a one-time thing, maybe a drifter or a prankster, but deep down, I wasn't sure. The way that figure had stood, so still, so focused on our house, it felt personal, like they knew we were there. Years later, I still think about that night. We moved away when I went to college, and the house belongs to someone else now, but the memory lingers sharp and unsettling. I've read about similar stories since then. Strange figures, late-night knocks, no explanation, and it makes me wonder, was it just a person, someone with bad intentions? Or was it something else, something tied to the woods that bordered our home, something that didn't belong in the light? I don't know, and maybe I never will. But I do know this. That night, something was watching us, and I'll never forget the fear of seeing it stare back. This story takes me back to when I was 17, living with my family in a small, rural town in upstate New York. Our house was a two-story farmhouse, old but well-loved, surrounded by fields and a thick forest that stretched out behind our property. The town was quiet, the kind of place where everyone knew your name, and life moved at a slow, predictable pace. My parents, my younger sister, Lily, who was 13, and I had lived there for years, and our home was a haven of warmth and routine. But one winter night in 2011, something happened that turned our safe, familiar world upside down, leaving me with a fear that still lingers in the corners of my mind. It was mid-December, and a heavy snow had blanketed the town, piling up in drifts that sparkled under the moonlight. The air was bitter cold, the kind that stung your face and made your breath fog in clouds. My parents had gone to a neighbor's holiday party a few miles away, leaving me in charge of Lily. It was a typical Saturday night. Lily was upstairs in her room, probably texting her friends or listening to music, while I was in the living room, wrapped in a quilt on the couch, watching a movie. The TV cast a soft glow across the room, and the wood stove in the corner crackled, filling the house with a cozy warmth that contrasted with the icy world outside. The windows rattled faintly as the wind howled, but I felt secure, lulled by the familiarity of home. Around 11 p.m., I heard a sound that pulled me out of the movie, a low, scraping noise like something dragging across the porch. I paused the TV, the sudden silence amplifying every creak and groan of the house. The noise came again, slow and deliberate, as if someone was pulling a heavy object along the wooden boards outside. My heart gave a quick jolt, but I told myself it was probably just a branch, caught in the wind and scraping against the house. The storm was fierce, after all, and our porch was exposed to the elements. Still, the sound was unsettling, too rhythmic to be random, and it set my nerves on edge. I stood, pulling the quilt around my shoulders, and moved to the front window, peering through the frosted glass. The porch was empty, the snow undisturbed except for the fresh powder piling up in the corners. The outdoor light was on, casting a pale circle across the steps, but beyond that, the night was a wall of darkness, the forest a shadowy blur in the distance. I waited, holding my breath, but the scraping stopped, replaced by the steady howl of the wind. I was about to turn back to the couch when another sound froze me in place, a soft, muffled thud coming from the back of the house, near the kitchen door. My stomach twisted, a cold prickle of fear creeping up my spine. The back door led to a small deck that faced the forest, a place we rarely use in winter because of the snow. No one would be out there at this hour, not in a storm like this. I grabbed my phone from the coffee table, my hands trembling slightly, and crept toward the kitchen, the quilt trailing behind me like a cape. The house felt vast and unfamiliar in the dim light, every shadow a potential threat. The kitchen was dark, lit only by the faint glow of the microwave clock, and the back door stood at the far end, its glass panel covered by a thin curtain. I hesitated, my heart pounding, and listened. The thud came again, heavier this time, followed by a faint scratching, like nails clawing the wood. My mind raced. Could it be an animal, a raccoon, or a stray dog seeking shelter? But the sounds were too deliberate, too human, and the thought made my blood run cold. I edged closer to the door, my phone clutched tightly, and pulled the curtain aside just enough to peek out. The deck was empty, the snow piled high and untouched, but beyond the railing, at the edge of the yard where the forest began, I saw something that made my breath catch, a figure tall and indistinct, standing motionless in the snow. The figure was shrouded in shadow, its details swallowed by the storm, but it was unmistakably human, its silhouette stark against the white landscape. It faced the house, unmoving, as if staring straight at me. My heart slammed against my ribs, my fingers trembling as I gripped the curtain. The scratching at the door stopped, but the figure didn't move, its presence a silent threat that filled the air with dread. I let the curtain fall, my legs shaky, and backed away, my mind screaming at me to act. I dialed my dad's number, my hands fumbling, and pressed the phone to my ear, praying he'd answer quickly. He picked up on the second ring, his voice cheerful but distant over the sound of laughter and music from the party. "Sarah? Everything okay?" he asked. "Dad, there's someone outside," I whispered, my voice barely audible. I heard scraping and thuds, and there's a person in the backyard just standing there. The cheer vanished from his tone, replaced by sharp concern. "Lock the doors. We're leaving now. Call the police." He didn't wait for a reply, and I heard him shouting to my mom as the call ended. I locked the back door, double-checking the bolt, and ran to the front door, making sure it was secure. The house felt like a trap, its walls no longer a shield but a cage. I sprinted upstairs to Lily's room, my footsteps loud in the quiet. Her door was closed, and I burst in without knocking. She was on her bed, headphones on, scrolling through her phone, oblivious to the world. "Lily, get up," I said, my voice sharp with panic. She pulled off her headphones, her eyes wide. "What's wrong?" she asked, sitting up. "There's someone outside in the yard. Dad said to call the police." "Come with me." Her face paled, but she nodded, grabbing her phone, and following me back to the living room. We huddled on the couch, the quilt wrapped around us both, and I dialed 911, my hand shaking as I spoke to the dispatcher. "There's someone outside our house," I told her, my voice trembling. "They're in the backyard," and I heard noises at the doors. My parents are on their way, but we're alone. The dispatcher was calm, her voice a lifeline in the chaos. "Stay on the line," she said. "Officers are on their way. Keep the doors locked and stay away from the windows." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me, and clutched Lily's hand, her fingers cold in mine. She was trembling, her eyes darting to the windows, and I tried to stay strong for her, though my own fear was overwhelming. The house was silent now. No more scraping or thuds, but the absence of sound was worse, a void filled with the image of that figure in the snow. We waited, the minutes dragging on, every creak of the house making us jump. I kept the phone pressed in my ear, the dispatcher's voice a steady reassurance, though I barely registered her words. Lily whispered, "What do they want?" her voice small and scared. "I don't know," I said, squeezing her hand. "But we're safe in here. The police are coming." I wasn't sure I believed it, not with that figure's silhouette burned into my mind, but I had to keep her calm. The wind howled outside, the windows rattling, and I kept glancing at the back door, half expecting to see a shadow move across the curtain. Finally, after what felt like an eternity but was probably only 10 minutes, I heard the crunch of tires on the driveway, my parents' car, followed by the flash of police lights. Relief flooded through me, though the fear didn't fully let go. I ran to the front door, unlocking as my parents burst in, their faces pale with worry. Mom pulled Lily and me into a tight hug, her arms trembling, while Dad grabbed a flashlight and headed to the kitchen, his jaw set. "Where did you see them?" he asked, his voice tense. "By the woods," I said, pointing the back door. They were just standing there. Two officers entered behind my parents, their radios crackling as they asked for details. I recounted everything, the scraping, the thuds, the figure, my voice shaky but clear. Dad led the officers to the backyard, their flashlights cutting through the snow as they searched the area. Mom kept us in the living room, her arm around us, her eyes never leaving the windows. The officers returned after a few minutes, their expressions grim. "No one's out there now," one said. "The snow's too deep to show clear footprints, but we didn't see any fresh tracks near the woods. We'll check the area again and patrol tonight." Dad wasn't satisfied. "Someone was here," he said, his voice firm. "My daughter saw them." The officer nodded, his tone professional but cautious. "We'll keep an eye out. Call us if you hear or see anything else." They left, their patrol car idling in the driveway for a while before driving off. My parents locked every door and window, and Dad stayed up, sitting in the kitchen with a flashlight and a crowbar, watching the backyard. Mom made us hot cocoa, her hands shaking as she stirred, and we all slept in their room that night. Mattresses dragged on the floor, the door locked tight. The next morning, Dad checked the yard again, hoping the daylight would reveal something the police had missed. He found nothing. No footprints, no marks on the porch, no sign of the scraping or thuds. The snow was pristine, as if no one had been there at all. But I knew what I'd seen, that figure, tall and still, watching our house like a predator sizing up its prey. We installed a security system a few days later, complete with cameras and motion lights, and Dad put extra locks on the doors. The police patrolled for a week, but there were no more incidents, no more figures in the snow. For months, I was jumpy, avoiding the backyard, keeping the blinds closed at night. Lily was quieter, her usual chatter subdued, and I knew she was scared too, though she didn't talk about it. My parents asked neighbors if they'd seen or heard anything, but no one had. I started having nightmares, visions of that figure stepping out of the woods, its face hidden, its intentions unknown. I'd wake up gasping, checking the windows, unable to shake the feeling that it was still out there, waiting. Years later, that night remains vivid, a scar on my memory. We moved away when I went to college, and the farmhouse is someone else's now, but I still think about that figure, standing in the snow, watching us. Was it a person, someone with malicious intent, scared off by the police? Or was it something else? Something tied to the forest that bordered our home? Something that didn't belong in the world of light and warmth? I don't know, and the not knowing is what haunts me. What I do know is that something was there that night, and the fear it left behind is something I'll carry forever. A scream shattered the night, sharp as a blade, jolting me from a restless sleep. For a moment, I lay frozen, my heart pounding, wondering if it had been a fragment of a nightmare clinging to my mind. Then it came again, distant but unmistakable, a sound so raw and human it sent a chill racing down my spine. My name is Takashi Nakamura, and what was meant to be a peaceful countryside getaway with my sister Yuki had just veered into a terrifying nightmare. We had arrived at the secluded farmhouse earlier that day, after a long drive from Tokyo. The city's neon buzz fading into the rear-view mirror. The rental property had seemed perfect. A traditional Japanese house with sliding shoji screens, nestled among sprawling rice paddies and backed by a dense forest that loomed like a silent guardian. It was the kind of rural escape we both craved after months of grinding city life. The relentless pace of work and noise. The air was crisp, scented with wet earth and pine, and the quiet felt like a balm. But now, as I fumbled for my phone to check the time, 2:17 a.m., the screens glow harsh in the dark. I heard a soft knock at my door. Takashi? Yuki's voice was barely a whisper, trembling with urgency. Are you awake? I sat up, switching on the bedside lamp, its warm light casting long shadows across the tatami mats. Come in, Yuki, I said, my voice thick with sleep but edged with unease. The sliding door hissed open, and my sister stepped inside, her face pale in the dim glow. At 25, 2 years younger than me, Yuki had always been the bolder one, the spark of adventure in our family. She backpacked through Southeast Asia alone, quit a stable corporate job to chase her dreams of starting a business. But now, wrapped in an oversized sweater that dwarfed her slight frame, she looked small, frightened, her dark eyes wide with fear. She perched on the edge of my futon, her hands twisting in her lap. You heard it too, right? She asked, her voice low, almost pleading. The scream? I nodded, running a hand through my disheveled hair, the strands damp with sweat. Yeah, I heard it. Probably just an animal or something. The words fell hollow, a weak attempt to calm her and myself. Yuki shook her head, her long black hair swaying with emotion, her expression resolute. That was no animal. Takashi. It sounded human. I wanted to reassure her, to dismiss it as her imagination running wild in the unfamiliar quiet of the countryside. But the truth was, I agreed. That scream had been too articulate, too laced with terror to belong to anything but a person in distress. It lingered in my ears, a haunting echo that refused to fade. Should we call someone? Yuki asked, chewing her lower lip, a nervous habit she'd had since childhood, her teeth leaving faint marks on the soft skin. I reached for my phone again, then remembered the rental agent's warning. No signal. I said, frustration creeping into my voice. Remember? The agent said reception out here is spotty at best. Yuki sighed, her shoulders slumping, but her eyes flickered with familiar determination. She was quiet for a moment, then stood abruptly, her movements sharp with purpose. We should go check it out. I stared at her, incredulous, my mouth dropping open. Are you insane? We're in the middle of nowhere, it's the middle of the night, and you want to investigate mysterious screams. Someone could be hurt. Takashi, she argued, her dark eyes flashing with conviction. Her voice steady despite the fear beneath it. We can't just sit here and do nothing. I knew that look. The same stubborn resolve she'd worn when she decided to travel alone or bet everything on her startup. Once Yuki made up her mind, there was no turning back. I sighed, dragging myself to my feet, the futon creaking beneath me. Fine, I said, my voice heavy with reluctance. But we stick together, okay? And we bring something to defend ourselves, just in case. 10 minutes later, we stood outside, the night cool and damp, a light fog rolling in from the rice paddies, curling around our ankles like ghostly fingers. I held a flashlight, its beam cutting a feeble path through the darkness, and clutched the sharpest kitchen knife we could find, its handle cold in my grip. Yuki stood beside me, her own flashlight trembling slightly in her hand, her breath visible in the chilly air. The farmhouse loomed behind us, its silhouette a faint comfort against the vast, open fields. In the distance, the forest waited, a wall of darkness that seemed to pulse with secrets. It came from that direction, Yuki whispered, pointing toward the trees, her voice barely audible over the soft rustle of the grass. We set off across the field, our footsteps muffled by the damp earth, the flashlight's beam dancing ahead, illuminating patches of grass and the occasional glint of water in the paddies. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made us jump, our nerves frayed by the oppressive quiet. As we neared the forest edge, Yuki suddenly grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my sleeve. Look, she hissed, pointing at the ground. I swung the flashlight down and my blood ran cold. There, in the soft earth of the forest boundary, was a clear human footprint, its edges sharp, smeared with a dark, glistening substance that looked horrifyingly like blood. Takashi, Yuki's voice quavered, her grip tightening. What do we do? I swallowed hard, my mouth dry, trying to keep the fear clawing at my chest in check. We should go back, I said, my voice low, urgent. Call for help. But even as I spoke, I knew it wasn't an option. The lack of cell signal, the isolation of this place. It trapped us. The footprints led into the forest, a macabre trail hinting at someone injured, possibly dying. If we turned back now, waited for morning, it might be too late. We have to follow them, Yuki said, echoing my unspoken thoughts, her voice firm despite the tremor in it. Just for a little bit, to see if anyone needs help. I nodded grimly, my heart pounding as I took the lead, the knife heavy in my hand. The forest closed around us, the trees' gnarled branches weaving a canopy that blocked out the stars, plunging us into near total darkness. The flashlight carved a narrow path, its beam trembling as we followed the bloody footprints, each one a marker of dread. The air grew colder, thick with the scent of moss and decay, the silence broken only by our shallow breaths and the crunch of leaves underfoot. We hadn't gone far when a new sound stopped me cold, a soft, rhythmic noise like someone breathing heavily, each exhale laced with effort. I held up a hand, halting Yuki, my pulse roaring in my ears. Do you hear that? I whispered, my voice barely audible. She nodded, her eyes wide with fear, her flashlight clutched like a lifeline. The sound came from just ahead, beyond a thick cluster of bushes, their leaves glistening in the beam's light. Slowly, carefully, we crept forward, my hand trembling as I parted the bushes, the branches snagging at my jacket. Yuki raised her flashlight, its beam slicing through the darkness. It fell on a hunched figure, dressed in tattered clothes, its shoulders heaving with each labored breath. The figure faced away from us, oblivious to our presence, its form shrouded in shadow. At our approach, it went still, the breathing halting abruptly. "Hello," I called, my voice unnaturally loud in the forest quiet, echoing off the trees. "Are you hurt? We can help." The figure turned, and the words died in my throat. Its face was a mask of blood and dirt, eyes wild and unfocused, glinting with manic intensity. In its hand gleamed a large hunting knife, the blade dark with dry blood, its edge catching the flashlight's light. For a moment, we stood frozen, locked in a tableau of horror, the air thick with the weight of what was to come. Then the figure let out an inhuman howl, a sound that tore through the night, and lunged toward us, the knife slashing through the air. I reacted on instinct, shoving Yuki backward, her gasp sharp in my ears. I swung our kitchen knife in a wild arc, the blade connecting with something solid, a glancing blow to the figure's arm. It stumbled back with a grunt of pain, the knife slipping slightly in its grip. "Run," I yelled, grabbing Yuki's hand and pulling her along as I turned to flee. We crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at our faces, roots threatening to trip us with every step. Behind us, the figure pursued, its howling growing closer, a relentless predator driven by madness. The forest seemed to conspire against us, the trees closing in, the darkness swallowing our flashlight's beam. Yuki's breath came in ragged gasps beside me, her hands slick with sweat and mine. "The house!" she gasped as we broke free of the tree line, the open field stretching before us, the farmhouse a distant beacon under the moon's pale glow. "We need to get to the house." We sprinted across the field, the damp grass slick under our feet, the fog swirling around us like a living thing. I chanced a glance back and saw a dark figure emerge from the forest, moving with unnatural speed, its silhouette a nightmare against the trees. We reached the farmhouse, my hand shaking as I fumbled with the key, the metal slipping against the lock. Footsteps pounded up the path behind us, closer with every second. Finally, the key caught and the door swung open. We tumbled inside, slamming it shut and throwing the bolt, the sound of it locking a fleeting relief. For a moment, we stood there, gasping for breath, our ears straining for any sound from outside. The silence was deafening, broken only by our ragged breathing and the frantic pounding of our hearts. Yuki's eyes were wide, her face pale as she clutched my arm. What was that thing?" she whispered, her voice trembling, barely audible. I shook my head, my mind reeling, still trying to process the blood-streaked face, those mad eyes. "I don't know," I said, my voice hoarse, "but we need to get out of here. Now!" We hurried to gather our things, throwing clothes into our bags with frantic haste, the room's shadows looming larger in the dim light. As I zipped up my suitcase, a new sound froze me in place. The creak of a floorboard from the room next door, slow and deliberate. Yuki and I exchanged a terrified glance, our breaths catching. We had locked the front door, checked every window. If someone was in the house, they hadn't come through the front. The back door, I mouthed silently, pointing toward the rear of the house. Yuki nodded, clutching her bag to her chest, her eyes darting to the hallway. As quietly as we could, we crept toward the back, every shadow a potential threat, every creak of the old house sounding like approaching footsteps. We had just reached the back door, my hand on the handle, when a figure stepped out of the darkness, blocking our path. It was the attacker from the forest, his face still streaked with blood, the hunting knife gleaming in the dim light, its blade a silent promise of violence. "Nowhere to run now," he growled. his voice a raspy whisper that sent chills down my spine, his eyes glinting with a twisted glee. I pushed Yuki behind me, raising our kitchen knife, my hand trembling but resolute. "Stay back," I warned, forcing my voice to stay steady, though fear clawed at my throat. "The police are on their way." The man's laugh was a harsh, grating sound, echoing in the narrow hallway. "No, they're not," he said, his grin widening to reveal teeth stained with blood, his breath hot and sour. "No one's coming to help you, just like no one came to help the others." Others? Yuki's voice was barely audible, a whisper of dread from behind me. The man's eyes flicked to her, his grin growing feral. "Oh, yes, so many others. The forest gets hungry, you see, and I feed it." He lunged suddenly, the knife slashing through the air, a silver arc aimed at my chest. I parried the blow with our knife, the impact sending shockwaves up my arm, the blade screeching as they met. Yuki screamed, scrambling backward, her bag hitting the floor with a thud. What followed was a desperate struggle, a chaotic dance of flashing blades and dodge blows. I had no training, no experience in fighting, and it was all I could do to keep the madman's knife from finding its mark. My arms burned, my breath came in ragged gasps, the world narrowing to the glint of steel and the pounding of my heart. In the chaos, I heard the sound of breaking glass, sharp and jarring. I chanced a glance and saw Yuki smashing a window with a chair, the shards glittering as they fell. She climbed out, her movements frantic. "Takashi, come on!" she yelled, her voice piercing the haze of the fight. Seizing the moment of distraction, I kicked out hard, my foot catching the man's knee with a sickening crunch. He stumbled, his knife clattering against the wall, and I bolted for the window, adrenaline surging through me. I had one leg over the sill when I felt a hand grab my shirt, yanking me back with brutal force. I turned, swinging the knife blindly, and felt it connect, the blade sinking into flesh. The man howled in pain, his grip loosening, and I tumbled out of the window, landing hard on the ground outside, the air knocked from my lungs. Yuki was there in an instant, helping me to my feet, her hands shaking but strong. "The car," I gasped, my voice raw, my chest heaving. "We need to get to the car." We ran, not daring to look back, the farmhouse's silhouette fading into fog. I could hear enraged shouts from the house, the sound of more breaking glass, a cacophony of fury. As we reached the car, parked haphazardly in the gravel drive, a figure burst out the front door, charging toward us with inhuman speed, the knife gleaming in his hand. I fumbled with the keys, my fingers slick with sweat, finally unlocking the doors. We dove inside, and I jammed the key into the ignition, silently praying the engine would start. The car roared to life, a growl of defiance, just as the attacker reached us, slamming into the driver's side door with a force that rocked the vehicle. His face appeared at the window, a mass of blood and rage, his fists pounding on the glass, the sound of thunderous drumbeat. I threw the car into reverse, flooring the accelerator, and we shot backward, the sudden movement throwing him off balance. Gravel sprayed beneath the tires as I shifted into drive and sped away, the road stretching into the darkness ahead. In the rearview mirror, I saw him standing in the middle of the road, his figure growing smaller as we fled. But even from a distance, the mad glee on his face was unmistakable, a twisted grin that burned itself into my memory. We drove in silence for a long time, the adrenaline slowly ebbing, leaving us shaky and exhausted, our breaths fogging the car's windows. The countryside rolled past, endless fields and shadowed trees, the night pressing against us like a living thing. It wasn't until we reached the outskirts of a small town, the streetlights casting a warm glow that banished the oppressive darkness, that Yuki finally spoke. What do we do now?" she asked, her voice small, frightened, her hand still clutching the edge of her seat. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles white, my jaw clenched. "We go to the police," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. "Tell them everything." But even as I said it, doubt gnawed at me. Would anyone believe our story? a madman in the forest, talking about feeding people to the woods. It sounded like something out of a horror movie. Too wild, too impossible to be real. As we pulled into the parking lot of the local police station, the building's fluorescent lights stark against the pre-dawn sky, I caught Yuki's eye. In her gaze, I saw the same mix of fear, disbelief, and determination that churned in my chest. "Whatever happens," I said, reaching out to squeeze her hand, her skin cold but her grip firm. "We stick together, okay?" She nodded, managing a weak smile, her eyes gleaming with unshed tears. "Okay." As we walked into the station, the glass doors hissing shut behind us, I couldn't shake the feeling that our ordeal was far from over. The memory of that blood-streaked face, those mad eyes, lingered like a shadow, a haunting presence that would follow me for years. And somewhere out there in the dark heart of the forest, I knew a hunger still waited, unsated and eternal, its appetite as vast and unyielding as the night itself. The first letter arrived on a Tuesday, its plain white envelope unassuming, blending seamlessly with the usual bills and junk mail. By Friday, I was sleeping with a kitchen knife tucked under my pillow, its cold steel a desperate anchor against the growing terror. By the following Wednesday, I was certain I'd never feel safe again, my sense of security shattered like glass under a hammer. My name is Awen, and someone or something knows every detail of my life, watching me with an intimacy that defies reason and turns my world into a prison of fear. I remember staring at that first envelope, my coffee going cold on the kitchen table, the morning light filtering through the window in soft, golden rays. The envelope bore no return address, just my name and address in neat block letters, precise and impersonal. My fingers hesitated before tearing it open, a faint unease stirring in my chest. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the message typed with chilling clarity. *7:15 a.m. Alarm goes off. You hit snooze twice before dragging yourself out of bed. 7:32 a.m. Shower. You sing Bohemian Rhapsody quietly, stumbling over the lyrics halfway through. 8:05 a.m. Breakfast. Toast with strawberry jam, coffee with too much sugar. 8:17 a.m. You leave for work, locking the door twice to be sure. Asterisk. It went on, detailing my entire previous day with unsettling accuracy. Every mundane action, every fleeting conversation, every small gesture laid out in clinical detail. My hand shook as I read, the paper crinkling under my grip, the coffee forgotten as a chill crept up my spine despite the warm spring morning. I told myself it was a prank, an elaborate joke by a co-worker with too much time, or maybe my sister pulling a twisted stunt. But deep down, a primal instinct whispered that this was no game. This was something darker, something that knew me in ways no one should. The second letter arrived the next day, and another the day after. Each one recounted my activities with the same meticulous precision. They noted the exact time I checked my phone, the words I muttered under my breath during a stressful call, the way I paused to tie my shoelace on the way to the bus stop. The letters weren't just observing me. They were dissecting my life, peeling back layers I thought were private. I began to feel eyes on me constantly, an invisible gaze scrutinizing my every move. Sleep became a stranger, my appetite vanished, and paranoia seeped into every corner of my existence, turning familiar spaces into traps. By the end of the week, I couldn't take it anymore. The weight of those letters, stacked like accusations on my kitchen counter, was crushing me. I called my best friend, Oswald, my voice cracking as I gripped the phone, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Oh, I need help. Something's happening, and I don't know what to do." The raw fear in my tone must have been unmistakable, because he didn't hesitate. "I'm on my way," he said, his voice steady, a lifeline in the storm. "Don't go anywhere, okay?" 20 minutes later, we sat at my kitchen table, the stack of letters between us like a toxic presence. Oswald's face grew more troubled with each one he read, his fingers tightening on the paper, his jaw clenching. Jesus, why? He breathed, running a hand through his dark, tousled hair, his eyes wide with disbelief. This is seriously messed up. Have you gone to the police? I shook my head, wrapping my arms around myself. The fabric of my sweater, a thin barrier against the chill that had settled in my bones. And tell them what? I said, my voice bitter, edged with desperation. That someone's writing down what I do all day. They'd laugh me out of the station. Oswald frowned, rereading one of the letters, his brow furrowing as he traced the words with his finger. This isn't just observation, though, he said, his voice low, almost reluctant. Some of this, there's no way anyone could know this stuff without being inside your house. Inside your head, even. A shudder ran through me, his words slicing through the fragile defenses I'd built. He was right. The letters didn't just recount my public activities. They detailed private moments. Conversations I'd had alone in my bedroom. Thoughts that flickered through my mind while staring out the window. Dreams I'd barely recalled upon waking. Their images hazy and fragmented. What do I do, oh? I whispered, hating how small and scared my voice sounded. Like a child seeking comfort from a nightmare. Oswald was quiet for a moment, his brow furrowed in thought, his hands resting on the table as if grounding himself. Okay, he said finally, his voice resolute, cutting to the haze of my panic. Here's what we're going to do. First, you're staying at my place for a few days. We'll set up cameras here, see if we can catch whoever's doing this, and we'll take these letters to my friend at the police station. Off the record for now, but at least to start a paper trail. I nodded, gratitude flooding through me, his calm rationality a beacon in the chaos. We spent the rest of the day securing my apartment, checking every corner for hidden cameras or listening devices, our hands brushing against walls and furniture, as if we could uncover the source of this intrusion. I packed a bag, my movements mechanical, my eyes darting to windows, half expecting to see a face staring back. As we left, the door clicking shut behind us, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on my back, a relentless gaze that followed me down the hallway, out into the street, always watching. The next few days at Oswald's apartment passed in a blur of tension and sleepless nights. No letters arrived, a small mercy that did little to ease the fear that had taken root deep inside me. I jumped at every sound. The creak of a floorboard, the hum of the refrigerator, flinched at every unexpected movement, my nerves frayed to the breaking point. Oswald did his best to keep me distracted, filling the silence with bad action movies and takeout pizza. But the terror lingered, a shadow that clung to my every thought. On the third day, we returned to my apartment to check the cameras, my hands shaking as we stepped inside. The familiar space now alien, hostile. Oswald pulled up the footage on his laptop, the screen casting a harsh blue glow across the kitchen table. We watched hours of video, our eyes burning, the silence heavy between us. The footage revealed nothing unusual. No intruders, no sign of disturbance. Just an empty apartment, mockingly peaceful. The living room, the bedroom, the hallway, all still as if frozen in time. I don't understand, I muttered, rewatching a segment for the dozenth time, my fingers gripping the edge of the table. How is this possible? Oswald squeezed my shoulder, his touch warm, reassuring, though his own face was tight with frustration. We'll figure out why, he said, his voice steady despite the doubt flickering in his eyes. I promise. But as we turned to leave, my blood ran cold. There, slipped under the door while we'd been distracted by the cameras, was another pristine white envelope, its presence a violation of the space we'd tried to reclaim. With trembling fingers, I tore it open, already dreading what I'd find. The words stared back at me, typed with that same chilling precision. Asterisk 4:17 p.m. You arrive at your apartment with Oswald. 4:19 p.m. You check the hidden camera in the potted plant first. Your hands shake. 4:23 p.m. Oswald pulls up the footage on his laptop. You watch it 3 times, growing more frustrated with each viewing. 4:31 p.m. Oswald tries to reassure you. You don't believe him, but you appreciate the effort. 4:32 p.m. You find this letter, asterisk. I dropped the paper as if it had burned me, stumbling backward into Oswald, my breath catching in my throat. No! I choked out, my voice raw, trembling. No, this isn't possible. They can't know this already. Oswald's face had gone pale, his eyes darting around the room, searching for answers in the shadows. We need to get out of here, he said, his voice tight, urgent. Now. We fled the apartment, not even bothering to lock the door behind us, our footsteps echoing in the hallway as we burst onto the street. The late afternoon sun fell harsh, exposing. The city's bustle a stark contrast to the terror gripping my heart. I half expected to see someone following us, a figure in the shadows clutching a notepad, but the street was normal, busy with after-work traffic. People going about their lives, oblivious to the nightmare unfolding in mine. What now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, my hands shoved into my pockets to hide their trembling. Oswald ran a hand over his face, his eyes scanning the crowd, his jaw tight with determination. Okay, he said, his voice steadying as he thought aloud. We need to approach this logically. Whoever's doing this has to be using some kind of technology we're not catching. Hidden cameras, maybe directional microphones. We need an expert. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through contact with a focus that anchored me. I know a guy, he said, his thumb pausing on a name. Used to work in corporate espionage before going straight. If anyone can figure out how they're doing this, it's him. I nodded, too numb to argue, willing to grasp at any straw, no matter how thin. The expert, a wiry man named Leaf Wine with darting eyes and a nervous energy that set my teeth on edge, arrived the next day. He swept my apartment with an array of devices that looked like props from a sci-fi film, handheld scanners, probes that hum faintly, screens displaying incomprehensible data. For hours, he worked in silence, his movements meticulous, checking every inch of the apartment, behind picture frames, under furniture, inside light fixtures. Finally, he slumped onto my couch, shaking his head, his face etched with frustration. I don't get it, he muttered, more to himself than to us. There's nothing. No cameras, no bugs, no signs of entry. It's clean. I felt the last shred of hope I'd been clinging to crumble away, a hollow ache spreading through my chest. So, what does that mean? I asked, my voice trembling, my hands clenched into fists. Am I just going crazy? Leaf Wine's gaze snapped to mine, suddenly intense, his eyes narrowing as if seeing me for the first time. No, he said, his voice firm, cutting through the fog of my despair. I've seen a lot of strange things in my line of work, but this is something else. Whatever's happening here, it's beyond conventional surveillance. A chill ran down my spine, his words sinking into me like stones. What are you saying? I asked, my voice barely audible, the room seeming to close in around us. He hesitated, choosing his words carefully, his fingers tapping restlessly on his knee. I'm saying we might be dealing with something unexplainable, at least by our current understanding of technology. Oswald scoffed, his arms crossing, his skepticism a shield against the impossible. What, like psychics? Aliens? Come on. But I could see the doubt in his eyes, the creeping realization that what we were experiencing defied logic, defied reason. As if on cue, another letter slid under the door, the soft scrape of paper against a sound that stopped my heart. Leaf Wine lunged for it, ripping it open before I could stop him, his face going ashen as he read. This is impossible, he whispered, his voice trembling, the paper shaking in his hands. I peered over his shoulder, my heart sinking as I saw the contents. The letter detailed our entire conversation, word for word, including thoughts I hadn't voiced aloud. Fleeting doubts about Leaf Wine's competence, a momentary wish to run and never look back. What do we do? I asked, my voice small, scared, the weight of the letter pressing down on me like a physical force. Leaf Wine was quiet for a long moment. His earlier confidence evaporated, his shoulders slumping. I don't know, he admitted, his voice hollow. This is beyond anything I've ever encountered. The days that followed were a nightmare of paranoia and helplessness. The letters kept coming, each one more invasive. Always knowing things they shouldn't, always one step ahead of our efforts to stop them. They described my dreams in vivid detail, my unspoken fears, the way I hesitated before answering Oswald's questions. I stopped sleeping, surviving on caffeine and raw nerves, my reflection in the mirror a stranger's, gaunt, hollow-eyed, haunted. Oswald stayed with me, his own composure cracking under the strain, his laughter replaced by a tense silence. We began to doubt our own perceptions, our own memories, the line between reality and delusion blurring with every new letter. It was Oswald who finally suggested the unthinkable, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep, his eyes red-rimmed as we sat in his living room, surrounded by the useless security equipment we'd amassed. "We have to leave," he said, his words heavy, final. Not just the apartment, the city, maybe even the country. I wanted to argue, to cling to the life I'd built, the job I loved, the routines that grounded me. But as I looked around at the piles of letters, their pristine envelopes a mocking contrast to the chaos they'd wrought, I knew he was right. Whatever this was, wherever it was coming from, we couldn't fight it here. "Okay," I said, my voice barely audible, a surrender to the inevitable. "Let's go." 2 days later, we were on a plane, our destination known only to us, a desperate bid for freedom. As the plane took off, the city shrinking below us, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a fragile hope blooming for the first time in weeks. The hum of the engines was soothing, the cabin's dim lighting a cocoon against the terror we'd left behind. I allowed myself to breathe, to believe we might have escaped. But as the flight attendant passed by with the drink cart, her smile polite and professional, she handed me a familiar white envelope. "This was left for you at the gate, ma'am," she said, her voice bright, oblivious to the dread that crashed over me like a wave. With trembling hands, I opened it, already knowing what I'd find. The letter detailed our escape plan, our destination, even the seat numbers we'd chosen. Every word a violation of the safety I dared to hope for. As I looked out the window at the receding city below, the clouds swallowing the world I'd known, a terrible truth crystallized, sharp and unyielding. There was no escaping this. Whoever, or whatever, was watching me wasn't bound by distance, locked doors, or normal human limitations. I was marked, chosen for reasons I couldn't comprehend. And as the plane climbed higher, I had a sinking feeling that this was only the beginning. The first time I heard the footsteps, I dismissed them as nothing more than the late-night wanderings of a weary guest. It was just after 3 a.m., the hotel cloaked in the stillness of the early hours, and I told myself it was probably someone stumbling back to their room after a night of drinking. Hotels like this one, a mid-range haven for vacationing families, business travelers, and passers-through, were always alive with movement, even in the dead of night. But when the sound had turned the following night, heavier, slower, more deliberate, like someone pacing with purpose, my eyes snapped open, and a chill settled into my bones. The muffled thump echoed to the quiet corridor, dragging me from sleep and setting my nerves on edge. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the shadows cast by the dim streetlight outside our window, stretching across the plaster like skeletal fingers. The footsteps weren't hurried or erratic. They were methodical, each step lingering, the soles dragging slightly as if savoring the act of movement. I propped myself up on one elbow, the sheets tangling around my legs, my heart beating a little faster. "God! Not again," I muttered, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, the grit of exhaustion rough against my fingertips. My wife, Jennifer, slept soundly beside me, her deep, even breathing a steady rhythm that anchored the room. I glanced at the bedside clock, its red digits glowing 3:05 a.m., stark and unyielding. My instincts urged me to ignore it, to roll over and sink back into sleep, to chalk it up to the quirks of a busy hotel. But curiosity, that restless itch that always seemed to get the better of me, had other plans. I threw off the blanket, the fabric rustling softly, and slid out of bed, the carpet cool and slightly scratchy beneath my bare feet. I padded to the door, my movements slow, deliberate, as if making too much noise might summon whatever was out there. Pressing my ear against the wood, I held my breath, straining to catch any sound beyond the faint hum of the air conditioning. Silence. Maybe they'd moved on, I thought, my shoulders relaxing slightly. But just as I pulled back, the footsteps resumed, closer now, unmistakable. Asterisk thump, thump, thump asterisk. Each one heavy, purposeful, reverberating to the door like a heartbeat. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the lock, the metal cool under my fingers. Part of me wanted to fling the door open, to confront whoever was out there, but a deeper instinct held me back, whispering caution. I unlocked the door and cracked open just enough to peer into the dimly lit hallway, the glow of the emergency exit signs casting an eerie green light that pooled in the corners. The corridor stretched in both directions, empty, its beige walls and patterned carpet undisturbed. The footsteps stopped abruptly, as if sensing my presence. I stood there, the cold air of the hallway pricking at my skin, my eyes scanning the length of the hall for any sign of movement. A shadow, a flicker, anything. But it was just me, the silence, and the faint drone of the hotel systems. I shut the door, locking it tightly, the click of the bolt a small comfort, and climbed back into bed, try to shake the feeling that someone had been watching, listening just beyond my sight. Even as I lay there, staring at the shadowed patterns on the ceiling, the sound of those footsteps lingered in my mind, an unwelcome guest that refused to leave. The next morning, as Jennifer and I headed down for breakfast, I kept my eyes peeled for anything unusual, my senses heightened by the previous night's disturbance. We'd been staying at the hotel for 3 nights, and until now, nothing had seemed out of place. It was a standard mid-range property, clean, family-friendly, tucked just far enough from the city's bustle to offer a quiet retreat. The lobby was bright, with generic artwork on the walls and a faint scent of coffee wafting from the breakfast buffet. This trip was supposed to be a chance to recharge, a brief escape from the grind of work and school runs, but those footsteps had burrowed under my skin, a nagging unease I couldn't shake. Jennifer squeezed my hand as we reached the elevator, her touch warm and grounding. "You okay?" she asked, her green eyes searching mine, a faint crease of concern on her forehead. "You look tired." I forced a smile, the corners of my mouth feeling stiff. "Didn't sleep great," I admitted, my voice casual despite the tension coiling in my chest. Heard someone walking in the hall again. She rolled her eyes playfully, her blonde ponytail swaying as she nudged me with her shoulder. "That's what earplugs are for, babe," she teased, her tone light. "It's probably just another guest. You know how people get after a night out." I nodded, tried to let her words soothe me, to push the thought away. "Yeah, you're right," I said, forcing a chuckle. "Probably nothing." But as the elevator door slid open, I noticed a maintenance worker in the lobby, fiddling with a security camera mounted in the corner near the elevators. His laptop screen flashed static as he adjusted the feed, his brow furrowed in concentration. Jennifer headed toward the buffet, her sandals clicking softly on the tile, but I lingered, curiosity tugging at me like a loose thread. "Hey," I said, approaching the worker, my hands shoved into my pockets to hide their restlessness. "Is something wrong with the cameras?" The guy glanced up, then back at his laptop, his fingers pausing on the keyboard. "Yeah," he said, his voice gruff, tinged with annoyance. "Looks like the ones on your floor have been acting up since yesterday. We're trying to fix it." He shrugged, his eyes flicking back to the screen. "Could be a wiring issue." I frowned, a prick of unease settling in my gut. "Which floor?" "4th," he said, not looking up, his attention fixed on the flickering feed. I nodded slowly, my pulse quickening. "I'm staying there. Room 415. He sighed, tapping at the keyboard with a faint scowl. "Well, If you hear anything weird, it's probably just me or one of the techs working on it, all right? I forced a smile, but it felt tight, unnatural. Thanks, I said, turning to join Jennifer at the breakfast table, where she was piling scrambled eggs onto her plate. I tried to shake off the unease, but it clung to me, a pebble in my shoe I couldn't dislodge. The cameras on our floor were malfunctioning, and those footsteps, deliberate, heavy, lingering, didn't sound like a maintenance worker fumbling with wires. Something felt wrong, a subtle discord that gnawed at the edges of my thoughts.
That night, I made a conscious effort to drown out the world. I fell asleep with the television on, the low murmur of a sitcom filling the room with familiar voices, a shield against the silence. I figured if I could distract myself enough, I might sleep through the night without waking to those unsettling footsteps. But at 3:05 a.m., almost as if on cue, they started again, asterisk thump, thump, thump asterisk, each step a deliberate echo that sliced through the sitcom's canned laughter. I snapped awake, my pulse quickening, my body tense. Jennifer didn't stir beside me, her breathing steady, oblivious to the sound that set my nerves alight. I lay there, staring at the faint glow of the bathroom light we'd left on, its edges blurring in my vision, the room swimming with shadows. The footsteps were closer this time, unmistakable, as if they were right outside our door. I couldn't ignore it, couldn't pretend it was just another guest. I grabbed the TV remote, shutting off the noise with a click, the sudden silence amplifying the footsteps' weight. Whoever was out there had stopped, their presence lingering just beyond the door, the faint sound of breathing, or maybe it was my imagination filling the void. I got up, moving as quietly as possible, the carpet muffling my steps as I approached the door. My heart pounded, adrenaline surging through me as I pressed my ear to the wood, the surface cool against my skin. The footsteps were silent now, but the heaviness of their presence was undeniable. They weren't moving anymore. Whoever it was standing there, right outside our room. I took a deep breath, my hand trembling as I unlocked the door and swung it open, my eyes sweeping the hallway. It was empty, the same green glow from the exit signs casting long, distorted shadows across the carpet. "Hello," I whispered, my voice barely audible, swallowed by the stillness. Nothing. I stepped out, looking up and down the corridor, my bare feet cold against the floor. No movement, no sound, just the hum of the air conditioning and the faint buzz of a fluorescent light flickering at the end of the hall. I crouched, inspecting the floor outside our room, half expecting to find a scuff mark, a trace of whoever had been there, but the carpet was pristine, unmarred. As I stood, my gaze fell on the door directly across from ours, room 416. It was slightly ajar, just a crack, the darkness within absolute, no light seeping through. My heart pounded, a primal instinct urging me to retreat, to lock myself back in our room and forget I'd seen anything. But curiosity, that relentless pull, drew me closer, my steps slow, deliberate. Every nerve was on edge, my breath shallow as I pushed the door open gently, the hinges creaking softly in the quiet. The room was pitch black, the air heavy with the musty scent of disuse. I fumbled for the light switch, my fingers brushing the wall until I found it. The lights flickered on with a faint buzz, and my stomach dropped. The bed was stripped bare, the mattress flipped up on its side, leaning precariously against the frame. The curtains were torn down, hanging in ragged strips, and the furniture, nightstand, desk, chair, had been shoved into a corner as if cleared in a frenzy. In the center of the room, a suitcase lay open, its contents strewn across the floor. Clothes, toiletries, papers, all scattered in disarray, as if someone had fled in a panic. "Hello," I called, louder this time, my voice echoing in the empty space, my pulse roaring in my ears. A soft sound like the rustle of fabric came from the bathroom, and I froze, every muscle tensing. Fear gripped me, sharp and cold, but I edged closer, my hand hovering over the light switch by the bathroom door. I flipped it, the fluorescent light buzzing to life, casting a harsh glare across the tiles. The bathroom was empty, but the shower curtain was drawn closed, its plastic surface taut and opaque. I stared at it, my mind racing through every horror movie cliché I'd ever seen. The killer behind the curtain, the trap waiting to spring. I should leave, I told myself, go back to my room, lock the door, and pretend I hadn't seen this. But something held me there, a need to know, to face whatever this was. I reached out, my fingers brushing the cold plastic, my heart hammering as I yanked the curtain aside, the rings screeching against the rod. The tub was empty, pristine, its white surface gleaming under the light. Relief flooded through me, my breath escaping in a shaky exhale, but it was short-lived. As I turned to leave, I noticed a slip of paper stuck to the bathroom mirror, its edges curling slightly. I grabbed it, squinting at the messy, hurried handwriting. "Get out." The words hit me like a physical blow, my heart thundering as I bolted from the room, the door slamming shut behind me with a force that echoed down the hall. Back in the hallway, the quiet was deafening, the green glow of the exit signs mocking my panic. I stumbled into our room, locking the door and shoving the desk chair under the handle, its legs scraping against the carpet. Jennifer stirred, blinking up at me, her hair tousled from sleep. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice thick, her eyes narrowing as she took in my pale face. I shoved the note into my pocket, forcing a smile that felt like a grimace. "Nothing," I said, my voice strained. "Just couldn't sleep."
She frowned, sitting up, the sheets pooling around her waist. "You're pale. Are you sure you're okay?" I nodded, my hands shaking as I climbed back into bed, pulling the blanket over us both. "Yeah, I'm fine," I lied, my eyes glued to the door, the chair silhouette a flimsy barrier against the unknown. Just a little freaked out. I lay there, my body tense, the note burning a hole in my pocket, its warning echoing in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching me, their presence lingering in the shadows of that abandoned room. The footsteps, the open door, the note. Something was wrong with this place, a darkness that seeped into the walls. The thought of leaving crossed my mind, packing our bags and fleeing in the middle of the night, but the rational part of me resisted. We had only one night left, and the idea of uprooting ourselves now felt absurd, a surrender to fear. But the footsteps didn't return that night, the silence stretching unbroken until dawn. The next morning, as we checked out, I approached a woman at the front desk, her name tag reading Claire, her smile polite but distant. "The room across from ours, 416, I said, trying to keep my tone casual, my hands shoved into my pockets to hide their trembling. It looked like someone left in a hurry. She didn't look up from her screen, her fingers tapping steadily. "I'm sorry, sir, but that room's been vacant for weeks," she said, her voice smooth, practiced. "Under renovation." I felt the words stick in my throat, a cold weight settling in my chest. "Are you sure?" I pressed, leaning forward, searching her face for a crack in her composure. She glanced up, her smile unwavering, her eyes meeting mine for a brief, unreadable moment. "Yes, sir. Positive." I nodded, turning away, but her words rang hollow, a lie that hung in the air. As we walked out to the car, Jennifer's hand warm in mine, I glanced back at the hotel, its facade bland and unassuming under the morning sun. The fourth-floor windows were dark, empty, like nothing had ever happened. But as we pulled away, the engines hummed a steady comfort. I could have sworn I saw a shadow pass by the window of room 415, our room, a fleeting movement, like someone watching us leave. The footsteps echoed in my mind long after we were gone, a rhythm of dread that followed me home, a reminder that some mysteries linger, unresolved, in the quiet corners of the night. The moment I realized we were trapped, the air rushed out of my lungs, as if I'd been struck in the chest. 1 second, I was a successful real estate agent, guiding a charming young couple through a quaint country home, my voice bright with practice enthusiasm. The next, I was a prisoner, my clients, unwitting cellmates, locked with me in a house that had transformed into a sinister cage. My name is Oswald, and what began as a routine house showing spiraled into a desperate fight for survival, a nightmare that stripped away every illusion of safety. The day had started like any other, the morning sun warm against my skin, as I pulled up to the hotel to pick up the Thorpes. Emma and James were a young couple, expecting their first child, their faces glowing with the nervous excitement of new beginnings. They were relocating from the city, craving space and the quiet of rural life. and the property I was showing them seemed tailor-made for their dreams. As we drove out to the isolated house, the city's concrete jungle gave way to rolling fields and dense woods. I rattled off the home selling points with the ease of long practice. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, over an acre of land. I said, my hand steady on the wheel. It's a bit of a fixer-upper, but the bones are solid, and you can't beat the privacy out here. Emma smiled from the passenger seat, her hand resting protectively on her swollen belly, her blonde hair catching the sunlight. It sounds perfect, doesn't it, James? She said, her voice soft but hopeful. James nodded from the back seat, though I caught a flicker of uncertainty in his hazel eyes through the rearview mirror. It's certainly isolated, he said, his tone cautious, his gaze drifting to the endless stretch of trees outside. How far to the nearest neighbor? I consulted my notes, the clipboard balanced on my lap. About a mile down the road, I said, keeping my voice upbeat. But don't worry, the area is very safe. Crime's practically non-existent out here. As we pulled up the house, a twinge of unease stirred in my chest, sharp and fleeting. The property looked different than I remembered from the listing photos, more neglected, the white paint peeling in long, curling strips, the overgrown garden a tangle of weeds and thorny vines. The windows stared out like hollow eyes, their grime catching the light in smears. I shook it off, chalking it up to the difference between digital images and reality. Houses always looked a little rougher in person, especially ones that had sat empty for months. Right then, I said brightly, leading them up the creaking porch steps, the wood groaning under our weight. Let's take a look inside, shall we? The interior was dim, the air thick with the musty scent of abandonment. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that pierced the grimy windows, casting a hazy glow across the hardwood floors. As I moved through the rooms, pointing out features and potential, the spacious kitchen, the cozy fireplace, the room that could be a perfect nursery, that nagging sense of wrongness grew, a quiet alarm bell ringing the back of my mind. The house felt alive in a way I couldn't explain, its silence heavy, watchful. And through here, we have the master bedroom, I said, pushing open a door that resisted with a long, ominous groan, the hinges screeching in protest. Emma wrinkled her nose as we stepped inside, her hand tightening on James's arm. It smells awful in here, she said, her voice tinged with discomfort, like something died. I forced a laugh, though the acrid scent, sharp, almost metallic, hit me like a wave, setting my nerves on edge. Nothing a good airing out won't fix, I said, my tone strained but professional. Now, if you look at the ensuite bathroom. My voice trailed off as I tried the door to the hallway. It didn't budge. I jiggled the handle, frowning, my fingers tightening on the knob. That's odd, I muttered, pushing harder. Must be stuck. James stepped forward, his brow furrowed, his broad shoulders tense. Here, let me try, he said, adding his weight to the effort. But even our combined strength couldn't move it. The door was sealed shut, as if welded in place. Okay, no problem, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady, though my pulse quickened, a cold sweat prickling at the back of my neck. We'll just go out to the bathroom window. I led them into small ensuite, my steps quick, purposeful, but my heart sank as I saw the window. It was boarded up, thick planks nailed securely across the frame, the wood rough and unyielding. What the hell? James exclaimed, tugging futilely at the boards, his fingers scraping against the nails. This isn't right. Emma's face had gone pale, her hands cradling her belly, her eyes wide with fear. Oswald, what's going on? She asked, her voice trembling barely above a whisper. I swallowed hard, my mind racing, grasping for an explanation that wouldn't come. I'm sure there's a perfectly reasonable explanation, I said, though the words fell hollow, a lie even to my own ears. Let's try the bedroom window. But we found the same situation there. Every window we could see was boarded up tight, the planks fresh, the nails driven deep. This isn't right. I muttered, more to myself than to them, my voice low, urgent. They were all open when I did the initial walkthrough last week. James rounded on me, his face a storm of anger and fear, his fists clenched at his sides. "What kind of game are you playing here?" he demanded, his voice sharp, cutting through the stale air. I held up my hands, my heart pounding, desperation creeping into my tone. "I swear, I had no idea about this," I said, meeting his gaze, willing him to believe me. "Look, let's just calm down and think this through. There has to be a way out." But as the minutes ticked by, our situation became horrifyingly clear. Every door was locked or blocked, every window sealed tight. Our phones, useless this far out in the country, couldn't catch a signal, their screens mocking us with no service. We were trapped, caged in a house that had seemed so promising just hours ago. Hours passed in a blur of frantic searching and mounting panic, our footsteps echoing in the empty rooms as we scoured every inch for weak points, hidden exits, anything that might offer escape. But the house was unyielding, its walls a fortress, its silence a taunt. Every dead end, every immovable barrier felt like a deliberate mockery, the house itself conspirator in our captivity. As night fell, the house plunged into deep shadows, the cracks in the boarded windows letting in only slivers of moonlight. We huddled in the living room, the air thick with dust and fear. Emma sat on the dusty couch, her arms wrapped protectively around her belly, her face pale and drawn. James paced restlessly, his boots scuffing the floor, his movements alternating between angry accusations and desperate planning, his frustration a palpable force. "Someone has to come looking for us eventually, right?" Emma asked, her voice small, trembling in the oppressive silence, her eyes searching mine for reassurance. I nodded, forcing a confidence I didn't feel, my throat tight. "Absolutely," I said, my voice steady despite the doubt gnawing at me. "My office knows where I am, and your hotel will raise the alarm when you don't check out tomorrow." But even as I spoke, the truth pressed down on me like a weight. We were miles from anywhere, in a house no one was supposed to visit. It could be days, weeks even, before anyone realized something was wrong. As the night wore on, our situation grew more desperate. The house had no running water, no electricity, the faucets dry, and the lights lifeless. We found some canned goods in the kitchen, peaches and beans, their labels faded, years out of date. But Emma, in her condition, needed proper food, rest, a safe place to wait out her pregnancy. The thought of her trapped here, vulnerable, twisted my gut. "We have to get out of here," James growled, slamming his fist against a boarded-up window, the wood rattling but holding firm. "There has to be a way." I ran a hand through my hair, my scalp damp with sweat, my mind racing for a solution. Okay, I said, forcing myself to focus, to push back the panic. "Let's think about this logically. Whoever did this, they had to get in somehow, right? So there must be an exit they used." We began our search anew, this time looking for hidden passages, trapdoors, anything we might have overlooked. We tapped walls, listening for hollow sounds, pried at floorboards, our fingers raw and splintered. Hour after grueling hour revealed nothing, the house an impenetrable maze that offered no answers. As dawn broke, casting a sickly gray light through the cracks in the boards, we were no closer to freedom, our bodies aching, our spirits battered. James slumped against the wall, his face haggard, his eyes red-rimmed. "Why?" he asked suddenly, breaking the heavy silence, his voice raw with exhaustion. "Why would someone do this?" I shook my head, at a loss, my own fatigue dragging at me like an anchor. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice barely audible. "It doesn't make any sense. This house has been on the market for months. No one's shown any interest until you." A thought struck me then, so obvious I cursed myself for not seeing it sooner. "The lockbox," I said, my voice rising with sudden hope. "The key to the house is in a lockbox on the front door. If we can get to it, we might be able to unlock one of the doors." James's eyes lit up, a spark of renewed determination cutting through his despair. "Yes," he said, scrambling to his feet. Why did we think of that before? We rushed to the front door, our footsteps pounding against the floor, hope surging through us like a lifeline. But our excitement turned to ash as we reached it. The door was blocked by a heavy bookcase, its shelves packed with moldering books, shoved tight against the frame. Even if we could move it, the effort and noise would surely alert whoever had trapped us here. Damn it! James muttered, slamming his palm against the wall, the sound echoing in the quiet. I leaned my forehead against the cool of the door, fighting back tears of exhaustion and fear, my breath ragged. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I'm so sorry I got you into this." James was quiet for a long moment, his chest heaving, his fists still clenched. When he spoke, his voice was tight, laced with barely controlled emotion. "It's not your fault," he said, his words clipped but sincere. "You're trapped here, same as us." We made our way back to the living room, waking Emma to share our meager findings, her face pale but resolute as she listened. As we talked, trying to formulate a new plan, a sound froze us all in place, footsteps, heavy and deliberate, coming from upstairs. The floorboards creaked above us, each step a slow, purposeful tread that sent a chill down my spine. "That's impossible." I breathed, my voice barely audible, my eyes darting to the ceiling. We checked every room. There was no one else here. But the footsteps continued, moving from room to room above our heads, unhurried, as if savoring our fear. Emma clutched James's arm, her eyes wide with terror, her breath shallow. "What do we do?" she whispered, her voice trembling, her fingers digging into his sleeve. I looked around frantically, searching for a weapon, an escape route, anything to protect us. My gaze landed on a heavy candlestick on the mantel, its brass tarnished but solid. I grabbed it, holding it like a club, its weight a small comfort in my trembling hands. James positioned himself in front of Emma, his fists raised, his body tense, ready to fight. We pressed ourselves against the far wall, our hearts pounding, the air thick with dread. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs, then began to descend, each creak of the steps a countdown to confrontation. A shadow fell across the doorway to the living room, long and distorted, stretching across the floor like a claw. And then, in a moment that would haunt my nightmares for years to come, our captor stepped into view. He was ordinary-looking, middle-aged, with thinning hair and wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of man you pass on the street without a second glance. He could have been a neighbor, a co-worker, someone you trust to hold your place in line. But his eyes, dark, gleaming with a cold, fathomless madness, betrayed him, a void that swallowed the light. "Welcome," he said, his voice unnervingly calm, smooth as polished stone. "I've been waiting so long for the perfect guests. And now, finally you're here." His smile widened, revealing teeth filed to sharp points, glinting in the dim light like a predator's. The sight sent a wave of nausea through me, my grip tightening on the candlestick. As he stood there, his presence filling the room with a suffocating menace. The true horror of our situation crashed over me like a tidal wave. This wasn't just about being trapped. This was something far more sinister, a calculated game orchestrated by a mind unhinged. I glanced at the Thorpes, their faces pale, their eyes locked on the man, fear and determination warring in their expressions. I knew, with a sickening clarity, that whatever happened next, it was my responsibility to get them out alive. But as our captor's smile grew, his sharpened teeth a grotesque promise, I wonder if any of us would survive to see the outside world again. The house, once a symbol of opportunity, had become a tomb, and our fight for survival had only just begun.